Under a bright blue sky, a cook in an apron beats a frying pan with a ladle. 3 clanging strikes that serve as a harsh warning before the bloodshed begins. Encred groans, his hand pressed to his forehead as the first clanging strikes shatter the morning quiet. He mutters, the sound still ringing in the barracks. Encred stirs on his cot as a tattooed man pulls on a boot. There's something in my boot, he mutters, frowning at the leather. Encred lies still, his hand pressed to his forehead, the morning's clatter fading to a dull ring. He thinks, staring at the ceiling with tired blue eyes. Encred grips his right shoulder as he stands bare-chested in the barracks, a dark club resting against his hip. Behind him, a red-haired companion yawns, still shaking off sleep. A bare-chested man with light hair tied back bows. His head, a small dark object clasped in his hands. Outside the barracks, a brown-haired figure sits on a wooden chest, carving a small piece of wood with a knife beside a barrel and a tent under the gray sky. The camp erupts into motion. Men surge forward in a blur of steel and fury, the sharp point of a spear leading the charge. The charge tears through the morning air, a blur of motion and sparks as the soldiers hurl themselves forward. Encred's sword crashes into the enemy's chest with a thunderous wham. A pained "ACK" escapes the opponent as blood sprays across the armor. Encred's back hits the blood-soaked earth as the armored fist slams into his chest. But this is the end for me, he gasps as the gauntlet drives the air from his lungs. Encred lies on the blood-soaked earth, shield raised as the armored figure looms above. I had no special talent, he gasps through gritted teeth. Encred sprawls face down in the muddy dirt, gasping for air. His trembling hand stretches toward the fallen sword's hilt. The muddy battlefield churns beneath a storm of armored boots. Soldiers clash with shields and steel under a sky burning orange with dusk. A spear tears through the smoky air, its metal head glinting with deadly purpose. Swoosh! Yet Encred continues. An arrow buries itself in the throat of the man behind Encred. Blood sprays as Encred screams, the battlefield chaos erupting around him. Encred screams as an arrow punches through the helmet of the soldier behind him, blood and viscera spraying across the battlefield. Encred's blood-splattered hand tightens on the sword hilt as the blade sinks home. But as long as I wielded a sword in my hand, he growls through the ringing clash of battle. Encred's blood-slicked hand clenches the hilt as the steel sinks home. I believed I would someday become a knight, he whispers through gritted teeth. A gush of crimson bursts into the empty air, spattering the void as Encred's grip tightens on the buried steel. The story continues. On the fiery battlefield, Encred coughs a torrent of blood, the crimson flood soaking his chest as embers drift past. Encred chokes on his own blood, the dark torrent streaming from his lips as the ember-lit battlefield spins around him. Encred's boots sink into the bloody mud as his fallen sword lies nearby, embers drifting through the smoke-choked air. Encred's gaze fixes on the distant purple glow, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his cheek as the weight of his failures presses down. Encred's tear traces a thin line through the grime on his cheek. Not knowing that, he whispers, I die a meaningless death. The barracks erupt with the clang of metal. A heavy hand presses Encred's head down as a voice roars, Rise and shine! Followed by a commanding shout of Everyone up! Encred's eyes snap open, his hand flying to his forehead in startled confusion. Encred watches as the other soldier bends over, fumbling with his boot. In the barracks, a tattooed, bearded soldier glances toward the commotion. A bug! Someone yells from the floor. Encred's face tightens as the soldier pulls something from his boot. A grim shock settles over him in the dusty barracks air. Encred's boots scrape the dusty floor as he shifts his weight, one hand dropping toward the scabbard at his hip. Sparks fly from the belt buckle with each hurried step through the barracks' dim light. Encred braces his stance as 2 blades clash overhead, the dark battlefield erupting with sparks and desperate motion. Encred twists away as a sudden rush of air cuts past him, the armored figure startled. lost in the crackle of glowing sparks. Ankred feels the cold bite of steel tear into his back, blood spilling over the brown cloth as the blade drives deep amid the chaos of the battlefield. A flash of searing light and motion engulfs Ankred as the blade wrenches free from his back, the world spinning into a blur of pain and shadow. The blade sinks deeper into Ankred's side, blood erupting in a hot spray as the chaos of the battlefield swirls around him in shadow and light. Ankred stumbles backward, a boot slamming down above him as the battlefield whirls into a blur of blood and motion. The clatter of a frying pan pierces the barracks. Ankred jolts, his hand flying to his throat as another harsh slang rings out. Ankred crashes to the ground, a soldier's boot looming above him as the battle swirls in a haze of dust and blood. The soldier's armored boots slam into the blood-soaked earth, his gauntleted hand gripping a shield as glowing embers rain down from the sky. On the blood-soaked battlefield, a soldier in red and blue armor leaps into the fray, sword swinging through the rain of glowing embers. The clash of steel and the roar of battle fill the air. Ankred drives forward across the blood-soaked battlefield, his boots pounding the earth as the red blur of his sword carves through the rain of embers. Ankred's relentless strikes carve speed lines into the void, each diagonal streak, a memory of steel meeting nothing. The curved white bands shudder with phantom impact, scattering reddish sparks across the dark. Ankred's arm whips across the void, white speed lines tracing its brutal arc. A curved shield, scarred by countless strikes, shudders as embers and dust fly through the crimson air. Ankred's body blurs into a streak of motion across the blood-soaked ground. A sharp S cuts through the air as his speed shatters the battlefield's silence. A dark chamber erupts with motion as an armored knight lunges forward, red eyes blazing beneath his helm. His massive sword swings toward the viewer, the blade a blur of curved darkness. In the dim chamber, Ankred braces as the knight's blade sweeps past. Sweat and a trickle of blood stain his collar, the warm torchlight glinting off the wet fabric. Ankred's eye clenches shut, the torchlight flaring crimson across his brow. The air shivers with the blade's approach. Ankred's gauntleted fingers tighten around the sword's hilt, the leather groaning under his grip. In the dim chamber, he readies himself for the knight's next strike. Ankred screams, a guttural cry of agony and fury as blood spills from his lips. The blue-white fire in his eye flares brighter against the torchlit gloom of the chamber. Ankred's mouth erupts with blood as a brutal strike lands, his wide eyes locked on the hand that dealt it. If only I'd swung my sword more fervently, he chokes, the regret already stinging worse than the wound. The armored soldier lunges forward, his boot crunching against the cracked stone as he drives the sword's point toward the floor. The red arc of his earlier swing still lingers in the air above Ankred's fallen form. The story continues. Ankred plummets through the dark, his boots scraping against nothing. A blue crystal lantern swings on its chains below, the only light in this void. Ankred's eye flares with blue light, the energy streaming through the void like a silent scream. The darkness around him pulses with red and thin, pale streaks as he plummets deeper. The morning air rings with the clash of iron in a bustling camp, tents and flags fluttering under a cloudy sky. A ladle strikes a frying pan again and again, a harsh rhythm that shatters the silence of the void. The clang of metal on metal drags Ankred from a restless sleep. He groans, one hand pressed to his forehead as the harsh rhythm of a ladle against a frying pan echoes through the barracks tent. Ankred sits up in the barracks tent, rubbing his forehead. A bearded soldier, tattoos curling across his shoulder, pulls on a brown boot. "You're up on time for once, Corporal," he says. Ankred's jaw tightens as the bearded soldier's words sink in. He glances to the side, a flicker of unease crossing his face. The story continues. A beetle drops from the air and lands on Rem's boot with a soft plop. The story continues. The story continues. The young man watches the insect twitch on its back. "That is the 18th time I've seen that bug die," he mutters, his patience frayed. Ankred yanks the heavy curtain aside, letting the dawn light pour in. He mutters beneath his breath, "How many more times must I see that dead bug before this day ends?" The story continues. A young man's boots tread the dusty road as he leaves his hometown behind. "I took up the sword in my youth," the voice recalls. Ankred strains, fists clenched and teeth bared, as sweat crawls down his face. The sword feels heavier with every desperate swing. Encred stands beneath the old tree, the long sword's tip resting on the earth as he remembers the mercenary's words. If you are already capable of this much, you could become a knight. The flag of the Cyprus division snaps in the wind, its shield and cross sword's emblem stark against the blue sky. Overhead, a text box identifies the unit: 4th Company, 4th Platoon, 4th Squad. Across the field, Encred leads his new squad, the bottom dregs of the military. I am now the leader of a squad consisting of the very bottom dregs of the military, he reflects. His tireless training got him this far, and being in the Royal Military beats wandering as a mercenary. Encred marches at the head of his squad, the brown tunic and black shirt marking him as their leader. His tireless training earned him this command, but leading the military's bottom dregs feels like a cruel joke. The man from the crate lowers his head, brow furrowed. "Sir," he mutters into the dim barracks air. "Could you fill in for my morning duties today?" the weary soldier asks, his back to Encred as the morning sun climbs over the tented camp. Encred considers the weary soldier's request, his gaze fixed on the distant camp. The morning air hangs still as he weighs the favor. "You owe me one, Corporal," the soldier mutters, hunched on a wooden crate. Encred raises an eyebrow. Are you going to make me do your dirty work too?" Encred meets the gaze of the bearded soldier in the dusty training yard. Are you going to make me do your dirty work too?" he asks, eyeing the club resting on the man's shoulder. A knowing smirk plays on the bearded veteran's lips as he waits for Encred's answer, the dusty training yard silent around them. The dusty training yard fades into a dark battlefield. Two armored warriors clash under a star-scattered sky. The battle between Norilia and Aesven, the veteran murmurs, watching one figure strike another down. It is in this battle that the clash of swords echoes across the darkened battlefield as one armored warrior drives his blade through another's chest. "The battle between Norilia and Aesven," the veteran intones. "It is in this battle that I first died." Armored warriors clash in the star-scattered dark of the battlefield between Norilia and Aesven. 3 soldiers raise their swords and shields, roaring battle cries in unison as the veteran's tale of his first death echoes around them. The blade punctures the back of Encred's neck, driving him to the ground. "I have memorized everything that happens by now," he whispers into the star-dusted dark of the battlefield. "I have memorized everything that happens by now," Encred whispers, as the weapon drives into the side of his head, the star-scattered dark. Encred's wide eyes stare up at the scattered stars as the blade hovers beside his temple. "I have memorized." Encred's helm fills the frame as he twists, the red gloom streaking past. "I dodged the spear that comes from behind," he mutters, the vertical lines of the oncoming weapon slicing through the darkness behind his visor. Encred's helm shudders as the spear blade slices through the red gloom behind his head. The dodge is clean, a whisper of steel missing its mark. The strain of the dodge ripples through Encred's shoulder as the spear's edge hisses past. Sweat and debris spray from the impact of his second block. Encred watches the chaos unfold around him. A warrior lunges past, screaming, "Triple! Oh!" as his sword arcs toward the fading light. Encred's swords carve through the air, the clash of steel ringing as a glint sparks from the blade. "No, he used to die," he growls, driving forward against the chaos. Encred's grimace turns savage as steel glints past his face. "No, he used to die," he growls, the barracks ringing with the clash of blades. Steel clashes in the barracks as Encred's gritted teeth catch the glint of a blade. The air shatters with the force of his swing. Encred hunkers behind his round shield as the enemy's sword crashes down, scattering sparks across the dusty barracks floor. Arrows slice through the air around them. A dark-haired soldier swings his blade through the dusty barracks air. "There, he always died even after I saved him from the arrow," he mutters through gritted teeth. Encred grits his teeth as he braces behind the shield, the impact jarring his arm. "There," the dark-haired soldier mutters, swinging his blade through the dusty air. The dark-haired soldier throws his head back, mouth open in a soundless shout as his blade carves through the air above Encred's shield. A single tear rolls down Encred's cheek as the star-scattered void closes in around him. There! He always died! Even after I saved him from the Arau? He whispers to himself. First, Mission Claire. Encred's face hangs in the star-scattered void, his dark hair stark against the reddish haze. No sound reaches him, only the memory of blood and the weight of another failure. Encred's body slumps, light, pinkish skin mottled with dust and debris. The cold shard's droplet still glistens where it struck. The dark fabric of Encred's tunic soaks into the reddish gloom. The cold droplet clings to his skin, a single glistening witness to the shard's descent. Encred lies sprawled on the ground, the shard's impact still echoing in the air. Two men stand over him, their boots planted near his fallen body. The story continues. The armored warrior stands in the star-scattered void, his back to the viewer, as two bodies lie crumpled at his feet. He stabbed me in the neck 20 times now, a voice rasped from the darkness. On a blood-soaked battlefield of cracked red earth, the armored figure stands among the fallen, his sword pointed down. Is the opponent I face without fail, he intones, the words echoing across the carnage. On the cracked red earth of the battlefield, Encred exhales sharply as the armored figure strides forward, sword in hand. Encred lets out a long, shaky breath. The armor plates of his opponent loom close, but no blade cuts him yet. Floating dust and debris drift through the warm, hazy air of the battlefield. The story continues. Encred's bandaged hand shoots out, fingers curling into the gray fur. The creature twists, but his grip tightens like iron. The bearded man recoils, his arm lashing in a blurred motion as Encred's grip holds the twisting creature fast. S.E.? The axe bites deep into the gray-haired man's shoulder, the impact driving him forward across the dusty ground. The battle's roar fades into a reddish haze. An armored warrior stands motionless, dust swirling around his boots as the skeletal silhouette of a withered tree looms in the gloom. The dust settles on the battlefield. A warrior with dark, spiky hair and piercing purple eyes stares ahead, his gaze cutting through the haze of combat. Encred's gaze cuts through the settling dust of the battlefield, his face a mask of cold determination as the armored figure ahead looms in the haze. I is the beast heart. The words echo through the settling dust, carrying from somewhere beyond the haze. No figure steps forward to claim them. A wild beast who has no conception of death. The unseen speaker's hand tightens on the sword's hilt, the blade trembling against the star-scattered void. The story continues. Red gloom surrounds the armored warrior as sparks drift through the dusty air. His scratched armor catches the faint light, a silent witness in the void. The story continues. Encred's blue eye burns through the red gloom as he thunders, "No! Death only makes me stronger," he declares, his defiance cutting the air like a blade. The warrior in purple armor spins his sword with blinding speed, the swoosh of the blade, a thunderclap as it connects with Encred's face once more. The world spins, but Encred hears only the steady, deep thump of his own heart pounding in the void. In the darkness of his own pulse, Encred's heart hammers a defiant rhythm. Thump, refusing to yield to the crushing blow. A red heart pounds in the absolute darkness, pulsing with a fierce, stubborn life. Encred's will clings to that rhythm, refusing to be snuffed out. A single eye opens in the void, Encred's own, a fleck of red blooming in the iris as his heartbeat pounds on. But I finally dodged. Encred twists through the blur of purple and orange, both swords spinning in a desperate arc as glowing particles rain down around him. The sword descends like a falling star, and Encred throws himself backward, the blade's wind grazing his jaw as the bright expanse of the training yard blurs around him. Encred stares upward, his jaw slack and breath caught, as the sword's wake still howls past his face. A hand tightens around the hammer's handle, knuckles pale against dark skin. Somewhere out of sight, a blue eye flares, and a beam of light cuts upward through the empty air. Encred plants his boot on the blood-soaked earth of the battlefield. The bodies of the fallen sprawl around him under the amber sky. Encred's bloodied face twists in pain as the thud of a shovel meets dark water, ripples spreading across the surface. Encred sits submerged in the dark water, his armored head bowed in defeat. Ripples spread from his body as the specks of light above mock his surrender. A metal ladle smashes against a frying pan, the clang ripping through the morning air of the military encampment. "You're up on time for once, Corporal," a voice calls out. "You're up on time for once, Corporal," the long-haired man remarks, tugging on his boot with a swish. Encred remains seated, still blinking away the morning haze. Encred's hand pulls back the collar of his shirt, his blue eyes burning with cold resolve. "And I'm going to try again," he mutters. "A 22nd time." A thunderous roar shakes the battlefield as two armored warriors clash, one deflecting a sword stroke with a blood-splattered shield while the other presses the attack. Amidst the dust of the 33rd day's battlefield, Encred stares ahead, his expression hardening with sudden, clear. The battlefield dissolves into a blur of rust-colored earth and drifting ash as Encred's sudden clarity triggers a violent shift in momentum. The world becomes a smear of rust and ash, the ground spinning away beneath Encred's sudden, decisive motion. Encred's blade becomes a dark blur, the air splitting as he twists his body with lethal precision. Encred's body whips sideways, the blurred purple of his vambrace tracing a violent arc through the dust-filled air. The blade cuts through the air before anyone can react. "He's much too fast," a stunned voice mutters, as blood sprays across Encred's face and armor. Encred's sword carves through the man's neck and shoulder, blood erupting across the dusty air as the victim's mouth falls open in a silent scream. The story continues. A warrior crashes to his knees, the heavy THUET of his landing swallowed by the chaos still churning through the air. Blood splatters his armored legs. "He's much too fast," a soldier mutters as his comrade crashes to his knees on the blood-soaked earth, armor clanking and dust rising with the impact. The dusty battlefield settles as a silver pendant drops from the chaos, its blue center glinting like a captured night sky. A voice drifts from memory. "When I was a mercenary, I once accepted a job to kill some monsters." Encred leaps over the fallen beast, his sword slicing through the air with a wet, limp, as blood sprays from the blade. The corpses of wolf-like creatures litter the blood-soaked forest floor around him. Encred's fingers close around the silver pendant that tumbled from the fray, its blue core shimmering like a fragment of the night sky above the forest floor. Among the fallen warriors scattered across the blood-soaked earth, the dark armored figure stands tall, a long red ribbon trailing from his pale head. He gazes down at the groaning survivor and intones, "So that I can get closer to becoming a knight?" Then, with cold pity, "You must be in great pain. I shall show you mercy." The armored figure with the red ribbon steps forward amidst the defeated, the question on his lips, "So that I can get closer to becoming a knight?" The battlefield settles into an uneasy quiet. The groaning survivor tilts his head back, staring up at the dark armored figure standing over him. The survivor's face contorts with tension. The dark lines of strain carve deep into his skin as he grimaces up at the armored figure. "So that I can get closer to becoming a knight?" he groans, the words barely escaping his clenched teeth. Encred's jaw tightens, the muscles in his neck corded as he stares down at the groaning survivor. The hazy sky smolders purple and orange behind him, the only witness to his tensed silence. The dark armored figure looms over Encred, his single eye glowing like a forge-lit ember. The tainted blade of his sword catches the dying light of the purple-orange sky. Encred watches the dark armored warrior's grin spread, the single red eye burning brighter as the blade hovers between them. Encred hits the blood-soaked earth, armored boots skidding across the battlefield as sparks of dying magic scatter around him. The camp settles into twilight, the distant banner snapping in the breeze. A sudden clatter of metal erupts from the cook fire, a frying pan ringing against a ladle. As Rem's boot descends, a sharp crunch echoes. The bug planted inside is crushed underfoot. A bearded man with tattoos on his shoulder rises from his seat inside the wooden building, his serious gaze fixed on the doorway as the echoes of violence drift in from the camp beyond. Encred's blade cuts through the stale air inside the wooden building, his bandaged grip tightening as he lunges with raw, brutal force. Encred's eye narrows, locking onto his target with predatory focus. Encred's bandaged fist drives downward through the open air of the training yard. His opponent crouches low, bracing for the brutal impact as the swing whistles past. Encred clutches the curved weapon to his chest, his bandaged hand trembling. He looks upward, blue eyes wide with distress. "What have you done?" The bearded man's gaze locks forward, his tattooed shoulders tense. In the training yard's sudden silence, he waits. In the training yard, Encred stands before the bearded warrior. "How have you grown so fearless overnight?" the man asks, lowering his drinking vessel. Under the open sky, sweat glistens on Encred's scarred neck as he meets the warrior's gaze. "In truth, I learned it through death," he says. The gray-haired warrior rests a heavy arm across Encred's shoulders. "What does it matter? A man picks things up here and there," he rumbles, his gaze steady under the open sky. Encred's blade cuts a swift arc through the air, the whistle of steel punctuating his movement under the open sky. Encred finishes the arcing cut, the sword standing straight before him. The blue sky stretches overhead, and the polearms lean silent against the stone wall. Encred holds his stance, sword vertical against the blue. Nearby, the bearded warrior tilts his head back, his gaze fixed on the same open sky. A wide, toothy grin spreads across the gray-haired warrior's bearded face. He gazes up at the blue sky, a silent thought lingering below his chin. Encred's blade cuts through the air with a sharp swoosh, his counterattack a blur of motion. He cannot afford to die again. Encred's body blurs into motion, leaving a ghostly afterimage as he channels the speed of beast heart. The training yard feels the wind of his passage before the sound catches up. The gray-bearded man swings his axe in a crushing overhead arc, the blade splitting the air where Encred's afterimage had just been. Encred flips upside down through the air, the gray-bearded man's axe cleaving empty space. The blue sky streaks with motion as the corporal repositions, his torso twisting in a blur of speed. Encred lands from the aerial twist, his blade carving a clean arc through the air. The sound of the cut hangs as he steadies himself, blue eyes fixed on the corporal. Encred's jaw locks, teeth grinding as he braces for the next exchange. The corporal's axe hisses through the air once more. Encred stumbles, his boots scraping the dusty ground. Viewed by some as a cheap trick, the voice continues, "You've lost your balance." Encred sails through the air, sword still in hand, his gaze fixed on the open sky above the green hillside. Encred's boot slams into the earth, the impact jarring through his leg as he fights to stabilize himself on the grassy hillside. The gray-bearded warrior spins on the grassy slope, his smirk sharp as he tracks Encred's recovery. Blood spatters across the grassy slope, a wet stain spreading as the speed lines trace the arc of a weapon's swing. Sparks fly where the blade strikes stone beneath the turf. A rush of air surges across the grassy slope, marking Encred's violent trajectory through the morning light. Encred tumbles through the air, sword slashing as the grassy hillside rushes up to meet him. Encred's sword meets something solid in a ringing explosion of force, the impact shuddering through his arms. Encred's momentum carries him into the open air, his hand outstretched toward the falling sword as the hillside blurs beneath him. The axe-wielding warrior surges up to meet him, steel whistling upward in a gleaming arc. Two swishes rip through the air. Encred's dodge and the axe's return swing, as the battle continues its furious pace. Encred's hand shoots out as the air around him splits. "Ring!" And his eyes widen, the world spinning into chaos. The pale skin of Encred's chest splits as a long white blade drives deep, black lines of force spiderwebbing from the wound. Sweat beads on Encred's brow as his fist clenches tight, the memory of that killing thrust still burning in his mind. "Bah! Where's the blood?" Encred scratches the back of his head, baffled by the praise. "That thrust was the best thing you've shown me yet," the other man replies, though the strike clearly left no mark. Encred demonstrates the proper technique in the training yard, his arm slicing downward with force. "But it should have been more like," he growls, frustration tightening his voice. The story continues. Encred's blue eye narrows, fixed on the bearded soldier. A clear sky frames his unyielding focus, doubt buried beneath that steady gaze. Silence stretches across the barracks yard. The white page holds nothing but the echo of the corporal's verdict. Encred examines his open hand, the calluses and scars a map of past battles. IT. Was. A T. The word hangs unfinished as the clamor of the yard fades around him, the corporal's verdict still ringing in his ears. In the barracks yard, Encred grips both swords, the memory of the duel fresh in his mind. Between his thrust and mine, he mutters, analyzing the split-second difference. Encred chokes on a mouthful of blood, his stained left hand clawing at the wound. ACK! The barracks yard spins as the thrust's full agony hits him. On the blood-soaked ground of the barracks yard, Encred collapses to his hands and knees, choking. The armored soldier looms above, sword drawn. I shall show you mercy. The armored soldier's voice rings cold across the blood-soaked yard. I shall show you mercy! A single drop of blood plops onto the ground beside Encred's trembling hands. The story continues. Encred's face twists into a scream of fury, his teeth bared and his eye blazing with desperate resolve. The mud and blood beneath him do not slow his breath as he braces for the killing thrust. The white field swallows everything, no sky, no earth, no body. Only the hollow ringing of a death blow that has already landed. In the white void, a voice echoes. I shall show you mercy, it declares, as a face contorts in a scream, red light scorching the emptiness. The armored figure surges through the white void, arm extended like a spear. Their form blurs with speed, scattering pale specks of light in their wake. A figure streaks through the white void, a crimson blur of raw momentum. The air shatters as they slam into nothingness, leaving only the echo of impact. Under the open sky, Encred braces against the younger man's descending weapon. No! The younger man shouts, the clash ringing across the distant hills. A dagger punches through Encred's back. I shall show you mercy, the helmeted figure declares, but blood and steel betray his word. Encred collapses onto his back, eyes wide as the blood spreads beneath him. The dagger's steel still burns through his shoulder. Encred grits his teeth against the burning steel, blood spilling from his lips. The helmeted figure's hollow promise still echoes as the world fades to crimson. Encred tastes the cold steel of the enemy's blade, blood dripping down his chin as his vision blurs. The battlefield's chaos fades to the wet rhythm of each falling drop. A booted leg lashes out across the crimson-lit battlefield, the kick aimed at a sword-wielding opponent amidst the chaos of clashing steel. Encred crashes to the scorched earth, a blade looming overhead as a cry of agony escapes his lips. Triple. On the burning battlefield, a shirtless warrior with dark skin and strange markings looms over Encred, his eyes blazing with an eerie white light. The dark-skinned warrior's bandaged hand clenches the hilt, his blade deflecting Encred's weapon with a ringing clang across the scorched field. The warrior hoists his axe overhead, bandaged forearm braced for the next blow. His gray beard bristles as he sets his sights on Encred across the scorched field. Encred grits his teeth and drives his sword forward, the blade ringing against the warrior's axe across the scorched field. The gray-bearded warrior recoils, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. Have you gone mad? He demands, staring across the scorched field at Encred. Encred's gloved hand tightens around the hilt, blood smearing across the leather and dripping from the guard onto the scorched field below. Encred looks up from his bleeding hand, a wild grin splitting his face. Your hand is bleeding, the voice repeats. Why are you smiling? First screams into the chaos, blood spattering across his shoulder as the world blurs around him. A mass of armored soldiers surges forward through the blood-red dawn, their weapons raised as the clamor of war drowns out all else. First's raw scream cuts through the clash of steel, his muscles coiling as he throws himself into the fray. The scrape of steel against steel tears through the dawn as First's blade meets an enemy's guard, the sound splitting the air like a war cry. First's knees hit the scorched ground as a storm of sparks erupts around him, his ornate purple cloak trailing through the ember-lit air. First plants his boot on the splintered planks, shoving off amid the scattered shields and sprawled bodies of the battlefield. Blood streaks across the ornate purple fabric of First's cloak, each drop striking the scorched earth below. On the blood-soaked battlefield, First tilts his head back and declares, "And I don't lose my grip on my sword." First's gloved hand tightens around the sword's hilt, the blade angled toward the blood-soaked, cracked earth. Around him lie scattered arrows and the debris of a brutal battle. First braces behind his shield as a mighty blow sends a shockwave across the scorched earth. I shall show you mercy, First declares, his gloved grip firm on the sword hilt as the battlefield lies silent around him. First gasps for breath, his helmeted head bowed as the shockwave's force still trembles through his limbs. First exhales a sharp, questioning breath. Hmm. On the scorched battleground, First lies pinned beneath a bloodied blade, his single purple eye wide with terror as the knife hovers inches from his face. I've experienced every possible scenario while fighting him, First boasts, his wild grin splitting the air above the pinned body. First's laugh cuts through the air, a jagged promise of endless experience. Hey. He chortles, the sound amid the star-scattered night, a pendant pulses with cold celestial light, hanging suspended as if waiting for the battle to reach it. First's laughter fades as the night sky bears witness to the tale's beginning, its title and creators written in light. I saw it go in, someone cries as a fur-lined boot crunches down onto the dusty ground beneath the star-scattered sky. First's boot crunches into the hard-packed earth, the sound echoing in the quiet night. I saw it go in, he shouts, his gaze fixed upward on the star-scattered sky. Each step echoes in the quiet room as First walks away, his back to the observer. From above, a stern face watches him leave through the window into the night. The man stares after First, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. How can he be so shameless, he mutters, still reeling from the audacious request. First calls over his shoulder. Get me greaves, a shield, and daggers. I'll pay you later. The bearded man stares after him, eyes wide and mouth agape. The bearded armorer stares after First, his jaw slack with disbelief. I'll pay you later, the soldier had said, already striding away through the market crowd. First strides through the market crowd, already calling over his shoulder. I'll pay you later, he says, leaving the gaping armorer in his wake. You know I take my payment up front, First exclaims, raising his hand. Behind him, a gray-bearded man watches with a concerned expression, as First adds, I'm only trusting you this one time because it's you. First sits on a wooden crate, a thin rod in his hand, and fixes the bearded man with a serious look. It's like you have no conscience, he says, the accusation hanging in the camp air. First watches from the shadows of the tent, his wide eyes fixed on the bearded man's retreating back. The blessings still hang false in the air between them. First's unblinking gaze cuts through the camp's twilight, his expression a cold promise of violence. The red-haired soldier's whispered concern lingers in the air. First's sword arcs upward through the camp's dim air, his teeth bared against the phantom ache of countless deaths. First stands alone in the darkness of the camp, the red beam of light cutting across his helmet like a scar. He whispers to himself, his voice raw, what if I never win, even after thousands, tens of thousands of tries? The question hangs in the night air, unanswered. The longsword's tip scrapes the dirt, as First stares at the ground, the blue rings flickering around his boots. I've become stronger than when I started. Can't I settle now? He mutters, the question swallowed by the darkness. In the silent camp, First's jaw tightens. I have to surmount, he whispers, blue eyes burning with unyielding resolve. The wall, First whispers, gripping his silver sword as blue light ripples across the water at his feet. Another cloaked figure stands behind him, shadows pooling around the massive stones. First drives his blade into the wall's dark surface, the steel carving a deep scar across the stone. A flash of blue light ripples from the impact. First's blade meets the wall with a sharp crack, steel biting deep into the ancient stone. Particles of rock spray from the impact. First brings the flat blade around in a brutal arc, his muscles straining with the force of the swing. The crack of steel against stone echoes through the air. First's muscles strain as he brings the broadsword around in a sweeping arc, his teeth gritted with effort. First bends low, fastening the silver shin guards over his boots. I move one more step forward, he vows, the ground trembling with his resolve. First kneels, securing the silver shin guard over his boot. The leather strap pulls tight against his calf. First's unwavering focus is all that remains. A purple gleam in the chaos of his assault on the stone wall. A blinding white light erases the stone wall and First, in an instant, leaving nothing behind. The story continues. The story continues. The story continues. On the battlefield under a dusky red sky, First braces his shield and sword against a towering armored foe. Despite not possessing any special talents, I've survived this long, he resolves as embers drift through the air. First dodges the armored foe's strike, his body a blur of practiced motion. Small impacts kick up dust around him as he moves. The two warriors charge across the blood-stained earth, their boots kicking up dust as the chaos of battle swirls around them. First whirls mid-stride, shield braced. So I turn and cut him first, he mutters, his blade finding the helmeted foe's throat. First remembers the 71st day. A blade rises from below, slicing his leg. Someone cut my leg from below, he recalls, and I didn't even reach the twisted soldier. The blade slices upward, catching First's leg mid-stride. On the 71st day, someone cut my leg from below, he remembers, the ground rushing up to meet him. A blade smashes into First's greave, the clang of the impact ringing across the battlefield. First slams his shield down onto the fallen foe, the impact sending a shockwave across the blood-soaked ground. First braces behind his shield, the wooden planks of the wall behind him still smoldering with battle's embers. The burning wall crackles behind First as he grimaces, looking skyward at his spinning weapon. If I leave him alive, he interferes in my fight with the twisted soldier, he growls through clenched teeth. So, I have to be sure to kill him. The spinning weapon hurtles toward First's face, its blurred tip closing in. He braces, teeth gritted, as the air screams around him. First grits his teeth, a desperate snarl twisting his face as the whirling blade screams toward his eyes. Sweat streaks his neck, his gloved hand clenches the studded strap across his chest. Dust motes dance in the charged air around his shoulder. A volley of arrows from Falcon Claw thuds into the dirt around First. The sharp thunk of impact cuts through the chaos. Spears rain down around First, their dark shafts streaking through the dusty air. Sparks erupt from the impacts, scattering across the ground like angry fireflies. The three warriors brace against the onslaught. First grips his sword, grimacing as the air fills with flying steel. First grimaces, raising his sword to meet the next volley of dark spears. First turns and sweeps his blade in a wide arc, the steel cutting through the dusty air with a sharp hiss. The motion leaves a trail of scattered foes behind him. The dusty ground trembles as First plants his boot, the great sword held ready. A fallen warrior lies crumpled at his feet, felled by the blade's bite. First's boots scuff the dusty ground as he twists his hips, the great sword slicing through the air. A fallen foe lies near his feet, struck down by the blade's swift arc. The patterned fabric of First's cloak whips through the air in a blur, the swish of its passage lost amid the clash of steel. First sails through the ash-choked air above the battlefield, sword and shield ready. I can't win by just dodging and thrusting, he thinks. I have to outlast him. The rush of wind marks First's passage as he lunges, sword aimed at his opponent. The chaos of the battlefield blurs behind him. First cuts through the ash-choked air, sword extended, the world blurring to pink and purple streaks around him. The force of the blow sends First hurtling backward, his mouth open in a silent gasp as flames and debris streak past. The shock of the blow sears through First's face as he tumbles through the burning air, the battlefield spinning into a blur of violence. First's head snaps back as a fist connects with his jaw. "Oh, oh!" escapes his clenched teeth amidst the burning battlefield. The impact sends First hurtling across the scorched battlefield, trailing smoke and debris. First tumbles through the air, a blur of fabric and armor, his scream piercing the chaos. Triple. First's eye bulges, white streaked with red, as the force of the impact wrenches his vision into a blur of dust and pain. First's vision shatters into a storm of red and black, the impact searing through his skull like white-hot fire. The pink haze clears to reveal a dark grid of blackened bars and scattered embers. First's senses return somewhere far from the battlefield. First hurtles backward through the shifting pink haze, the world a blur of violet light and scattered embers as he is launched through the strange burning sky. First's head snaps upward, his purple eyes blazing as a blur of motion streaks toward him. Two fingers extended, trailing orange embers through the violet sky. Orange embers flare from the masked figure's fingertips as the thump of impact shatters the pink haze, his single red eye locked onto First's landing point. First's skin, pale, pink flesh, warps and strains as the full weight of the masked figure's descent slams into him. First grits his teeth, his body thrown backward through the pink haze as the impact ripples through him. The shattered fragments settle as a dark-skinned torso draws a deep breath, muscles tensing beneath the dim light. Amid the pink haze, fragments of First's shattered form spin outward as the word shatter blazes through the air, a dark staff's tip resting on the broken triangular patterns below. A hand grips the dark staff, its pointed tip resting on the shattered triangular pattern as the pink haze swirls around First's scattered fragments. First's hand grips the bow, muscles tightening as the pink haze of shattered fragments still drifts around them. First's arm tenses, his fur-trimmed gauntlet gripping the bow against the hazy orange-pink sky. First's dark-skinned arm tenses, the fur-lined bracer pressing against the bow as he holds his aim steady amid the drifting pink haze. First raises the long spear toward the hazy pink sky, while his other hand grips a dagger low, ready. The story continues. First looks upward from beneath his visor, his eye wide with alarm. A gloved hand reaches down toward the mace lying at his feet beneath the hazy pink sky. The story continues. First's sword lies embedded in the battlefield earth, its reflective blade catching the dim light. A dark-clad leg shifts nearby, victorious. The story continues. A heavy strike cuts through the air, the sound of a massive blade or fist carving a path across the battlefield. The clash of bodies and steel drowns out individual cries as the fight rages on. A massive, spoked shield spins through the air in a blur of motion, its passage marked by 3 sharp whooshes that cut across the blood-soaked battlefield. The great scythe blade shatters mid-strike, its dark fragments scattering across the dawn sky like breaking stone. A blade slices diagonally through the air, catching the dark-haired warrior across the face. Blood erupts from the wound as he recoils against the dawn sky. The bearded warrior bounds across the battlefield, ignoring the woman's cry, "It's too late! Don't do anything foolish!" Lunging forward, the bearded warrior ignores the woman's cry and charges with an enraged roar. On the blood-soaked battlefield, a hand reaches for a gushing neck wound as crimson sprays across the dark, chaotic surroundings. Amid the blood-soaked dawn, the dark-haired warrior braces against the onslaught, his open palm catching the spray of a nearby wound. The helmeted warrior braces against the oncoming foe, his sword catching the morning light. The brown-tunicked soldier lunges forward, blade aimed for his throat. First's blade meets the green-skinned warrior's with a ringing clang, sparks showering the trampled grass. Soldiers cry out and clash all around them under the reddening sky. The warrior in dark red armor strides forward, sparks and glowing embers swirling around him as the brown-tunicked soldier moves to the flank. Steel clashes on steel across the bloody field beneath the streaked sky. A sharp gasp cuts through the din of battle as an armored soldier on the torn field recoils, the scratched shoulder plate catching the blaze of the streaked sky above. He gasps, the star emblem on his shoulder plate gleaming amidst the sparks and swirling embers of the blood-soaked field. On the blood-soaked field, First grips his greatsword with both hands, his face tight with strain beneath the ember-lit sky. First braces his greatsword, the blade angled toward the streaked sky. The ember-lit field spreads beneath him, silent but for his strained breath. The gold-threaded pattern on First's cloak is smeared with dark streaks, the fabric torn from the clash. First's greatsword sweeps upward as a headless armored warrior hovers in midair, its red tunic and dark skirt bloodied from the earlier clash. The battlefield reeks of blood and ash as First stares into the distance, his purple eyes wide with shock and his jaw clenched against the tremor in his chest. The wall has fallen. A helmeted warrior lies face down on the rippling brick surface, surrounded by jagged debris suspended in the void. The wall has been conquered. First sees a blinding flash and hears a sickening crunch as the wall finally gives way, debris spinning into the void. A deafening crunch rips through the void as the wall's remains tumble into broken stillness. First tumbles headlong through the void, blood trailing from his wounds as the shattered wall's debris spins around him and the battlefield churns far below. First crashes to the battlefield with a sickening crunch. "GAH!" he gasps, sprawled amid the debris and chaos. First lands hard, his arm braced against the debris as sparks of impact scatter around him. First's robes billow as he rushes across the battlefield, the debris and sparks of his landing still settling around him. First's arm cuts through the glowing battlefield debris, his fingers reaching for the fallen soldier. First lies crumpled on the debris-strewn ground, his face twisted in pain. I won't," he gasps, while a bitter thought cuts through his mind. "I put so much effort into training you." "I spent a lot of time training him," a dark-skinned warrior with yellow eyes and a crescent moon on his forehead declares, standing amid the debris beneath the fading orange sky. The dark-skinned warrior kneels on the debris-strewn battlefield, his tunic soaked with black blood. The orange sky glows with drifting specks of ash above him. On the debris-littered battlefield beneath the fading orange sky, the young warrior grits his teeth and gasps, his fists clenched in agony. The bearded warrior plummets through the ash-choked air, his axe raised high as the orange sky streaks past him in a blur of motion. The axe carves a dark arc through the pink-purple sky, trailing black lines of speed as it hurtles toward its target. Glowing dust swirls in its wake. The falling warrior's axe cleaves the air as a bandaged figure turns, long dark hair whipping in the ash-choked wind. Clenching his jaw against the savage descent, the bearded warrior's eyes blaze with furious intent as the ash-choked sky streaks past. A warrior with golden facial markings and dark skin tracks the bearded warrior's fall, his pink eyes following the descent through the swirling ash. The bearded warrior swings downward through the ash-choked air as the gold-marked warrior braces, his pink eyes locked on the incoming strike. The story continues. The gold-marked warrior's torso erupts in a spray of crimson as the bearded warrior's blade bites deep, the impact shaking the ash-choked air. The blade's arc tears through the air, spraying blood across the trampled earth as dust and debris erupt from the force of the blow. Axe raised high, the bearded warrior drops through the battlefield haze, his boots striking the reddish ground near the fallen corporal. Dust and debris erupt around the crumpled blue tunic. Landing amid the ash and ruin, the bearded warrior flashes a confident smile, his axe held high as the distant clash of armies rolls beneath the crimson sky. Against the blood-red sky of the battlefield, a green-skinned warrior stands in silence, his gold earring catching the dying light as he stares at the ash-strewn ground below. The wounded, dark-skinned warrior stands amid the drifting ash, his yellow eyes fixed on the charred earth beneath a bleeding sky. Amid the ash-strewn battlefield, the tattooed, bearded warrior grips his axe and mutters, "The only way to kill him is to burn him with magic," while his mind churns frogs, a species born for battle. On the ash-strewn battlefield, the tattooed warrior clenches his axe. "I have to fight him with my life," he mutters. "It isn't worth it." "It isn't worth it," the bearded warrior mutters, his axe trembling in his grip as he eyes the blue-skinned warrior, whose red gaze sweeps the streaks of light across the battlefield. The blue-skinned warrior's red eyes flick aside, weighing the streaks of light above. "It isn't worth it," the dark-skinned warrior mutters, his yellow armband taut as he hefts the axe. Tap. Tap footsteps race across the battlefield as a figure in a brown jacket hurtles headfirst toward a helmeted warrior who throws up an arm to meet the oncoming crash. A warrior in a brown jacket launches himself headfirst through the morning air, his boots churning the dirt as the helmeted man braces for impact. The story continues. 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 The retreat sounds across the scorched battlefield, but the wounded soldier's gaze drifts upward, into a star-strewn void where a pale hand reaches through the purple glow. A voice, not of this world, intones, "For your fate!" The wounded soldier lifts his gaze to the star-scarred sky as the voice continues. T.O.B. The story continues. "Was the last thing that attacked me a frog?" The bandaged man presses a hand to his chest, the question hanging in the stale infirmary air. "I'm amazed I'm still alive." In the stale infirmary, the bearded man with the gray band tattoo studies first averted face, first refuses to meet his gaze, the silence between them heavier than the bandages on his head. "You still remember me, right?" "I'm your best friend," the gray-haired man says, leaning close to First's bandaged face in the stale infirmary. The story continues. The gray-haired man leans over the cot, but the dark-haired man with the bandaged cheek turns his head away. "We've never been friends, noble killer," he says, his voice flat. The camp sprawls beneath a bright blue sky, rows of tents and fluttering red banners marking the 4th Squad's temporary home. Beyond the canvas walls, green mountains rise in the distance, indifferent to the wounds and grudges carried within. First smirks from his cot in the infirmary, a fresh bandage on his cheek. "I see. I was wondering how a lowly infantryman like me ended up in the infirmary," he says. The story continues. Christ stirs on the infirmary cot, fresh bandages winding around his chest. He turns his head toward the red-haired man standing in the tent's entrance. Outside the infirmary tent, Saxon of the 4th Squad stands with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the horizon under a warm sky. The story continues. The story continues. The story continues. The bandaged man lies on his back, bandaged forearm resting against the floor. A harsh voice demands, "Out with it! What do you want?" As Saxon looms in the foreground. In the infirmary, the bandaged man studies the small container of ointment. "This is the ointment that Saxon often uses, but I thought he hated sharing his things." The story continues. The story continues. The story continues. Under a star-scattered sky, the camp's rows of tents stand silent against the mountain shadows. One open flap shows a bed and a wounded soldier inside, wrestling with an unfamiliar kindness. Inside the infirmary tent, the bandaged soldier stares at the canvas above. "I can't believe they're taking turns to come see me," he mutters. "They never seemed to care much about me before." Lying still in the infirmary cot, the bandaged man whispers to the silence above. "Are they worried about me? Really?" The fair-haired soldier pushes the tent flap aside, a red cup in hand. He steps inside as the bandaged man watches from his cot, a silent guest arriving at last. The story continues. The story continues. Ragnar stares with an apple in his mouth at the bandaged man lying nearby. "Well, excluding Ragnar," says the red-haired soldier on the ground, "he's definitely not worried about me." In the infirmary, the bandaged soldier lies still on his cot, bandages covering his arm and face. "Well, excluding Ragnar," comes a voice from nearby, "he's definitely not worried about me." The bandaged soldier props himself up on one elbow and nods toward the silent figure on the bed behind him. "And a soldier who spends most of his time staring off into space," he says, but Ragnar's gaze never wavers from the empty air. Propped on a pillow, the bandaged soldier calls out to the man lost in thought. "What are you looking at?" he asks, but Ragnar's gaze never shifts from the empty air. The bandaged soldier twists his head toward Ragnar. "What are you looking at?" he repeats. Inside the infirmary tent, Ragnar studies the bandaged soldier sitting upright on the wooden cot. He looks low and rank, so how did he get in here? The story continues. "Who here is the 444th squad leader?" The voice rings out from a figure in light gray, his shoulder and chest coming into view at the edge of the cot. A pair of metallic clicks sounds from the direction of the doorway. The bandaged soldier meets the newcomer's gaze without flinching, blue eyes sharp beneath his dark hair. The barracks grow still as the metallic clicks sound from the doorway. The bandaged soldier keeps his blue eyes fixed ahead, while a blonde elf with hair tied in buns steps into view, her pointed ears catching the torchlight. The metallic clicks ring through the barracks as the bandaged soldier meets the elf's gaze. She steps into the torchlight, her dark red tunic stark against the shadows. The bandaged soldier turns his gaze toward the elf, a silent question hanging in the air. His bandaged face remains still as the torchlight flickers across his blue eyes. The new 4th Company commander, an elf with long gray hair, steps into the barracks tent. Encred sits upright on his cot, studying her pointed ears with a questioning gaze. A soldier with a dark goatee stares in disbelief at the elf commander, a single bead of sweat tracing down his chin. Shock ripples across the goateed soldier's face as he meets the elf commander's gaze. Venzen stammers, a bead of sweat rolling down his brow as the elf commander's armored arm remains in view. Forgive me, ma'am, he blurts into the tense air of the company tent. To greet his superior by referring to them by their race. The commander's voice cuts through the tent, her armored arm still visible as she waits for an answer. In the commander's tent, Ankrit stands stiffly, his bandaged arm at his side as he stammers his apology. Forgive me, ma'am. Ankrit sits upright on the bed, his bandaged arm resting at his side. I am Ankrit, 4th Company, 4th Platoon, 4th Squad Leader, ma'am. The elf commander studies him, helmet in hand. The elf commander holds Ankrit's gaze. I look forward to seeing more of what you can do, she says, her tone carrying a promise of trials ahead. The barracks carry the scent of old wood and dried blood. Ankrit shifts on his bench, the bandages pulling tight across his chest as he stares at the gap between two barrels. On the path outside the barracks, armored boots crunch to a stop. A commanding voice cuts the air. Halt. She came here just to say that? The elf commander's green eyes lock onto Ankrit, her long pale hair shifting as a banner flaps in the breeze. Inside the command tent, a blond man shifts his weight with a nervous smirk, a bead of sweat trailing down his temple as he watches the elf commander confront Ankrit. Ankrit's blue eyes narrow beneath his bandages, a cold thought forming. It sounds like he just made it up. Another question flickers. Could he be nobility? Could he be nobility? Ankrit wonders, his bandaged face turning as his blue eyes lock onto the commander with piercing scrutiny. Ankrit's bandaged face turns, blue eyes fixed on the commander. Could he be nobility? The thought cuts through the morning air. Dawn breaks over the camp as twin red banners flutter atop the command tent, their white sigils catching the first light beyond the mountain range. Ankrit's hand tightens into a fist, knuckles white against the dim dawn of the camp. Ankrit's open hand spreads wide against the dawn, fingers flexing as the red banners snap overhead. Ankrit flexes his hand in the dim tent, the bandages tight around his arm and chest. It's time I start training again. Ankrit rises from the cot, his bandaged chest tight but steady. Where are you going? The other soldier asks. To the training ground, sir. Ankrit strides toward the window, the night sky dark and clouded beyond the glass. From the bed behind him, a gruff voice cuts through the silence. Fool! What use is it for a lowly foot soldier to train so hard? The soldier's hands rest clasped in his lap, fingers interlaced as if in quiet prayer. Reflecting on the last battle, he murmurs, is one of the few useful things I learned. High above the camp, a blade catches the first light of dawn. The steel gleams against the star-scattered sky, a silent promise waiting to be claimed. At the edge of camp, Ankrit lifts his sword toward the rising sun, the steel catching the first rays over the distant mountains. Ankrit's face tightens as the memory cuts through him. But what if it had failed? He wonders, the question burning behind his eye. The shadow of that desperate lunge still darkens his cheek. Ankrit follows through on a massive swing, the sword carving an arc through the open sky above the training field. Did I do the right thing by betting everything on that one attack? He asks himself, petals drifting past his face. If it had failed, I would have died. Ankrit's bandaged arm tenses, the muscles coiling beneath the wrappings. The memory of each costly lesson pounds through his veins. From the costly classes I took as a boy, Ankrit thinks, the bandaged limb tensing his memories of past failures tighten around him. Ankrit stands in the twilight before the seated blonde soldier. I don't know exactly what you're doing, the man says, his elbows resting on his knees. Ankrit shifts his weight, sword held loose at his side. That wiggling was to strengthen my grip, he says, his profile sharp against the fading light. Ankrit answers from above, sword lowered but ready. So that I don't die, he says, the words firm amid the dark roots and scattered light of the training ground. In the dim light of the training ground, the blonde soldier rests his chin on his fist, his gaze distant. And is there something you plan to become by protecting that precious life of yours? He asks, the question hanging in the twilight air. Ankrit turns the blonde soldier's question over in his mind, his gaze fixed on the twilight sky above the training ground. Under the twilight sky of the training ground, Ankrid stands silent as the blond soldier sitting on the gnarled root lifts the sword's tip toward the dying sun. I already reached my limit long ago, but at the same time, I've never stopped dreaming, the soldier says, gripping the hilt with both hands. The blond soldier's brown hand clenches the sword's hilt in the twilight, knuckles white against the dying light. Ankrid presses his fist to his chest, a silent vow forged in the shimmering air. The twilight colors bleed across the sky as Ankrid narrows his focus, the weight of that single word, night, settling in his bones. The story continues. Ankrid lifts his gaze into the twilight, the leaf and debris swirling past his unreadable face. But I just remembered something, he says, his voice flat as the fading light. Ankrid watches the blond-haired figure retreat across the dark grass. That's the first time, he mutters, the words lost among the trees. Ankrid clenches his jaw, the nameless stranger's warning ringing in his ears. I hope you remember my name when you've become... Ankrid's lips part as the stranger's words linger in the cool evening air. Who's the hero of the battlefield? A voice calls across the camp. Soldiers grumble about breakfast as morning light hits the rows of white tents and red flags. The morning sun beats down on the camp as a minstrel strums his lyre from a wooden crate, a playful grin on his face. Nearby, soldiers raise their fists, shouting, "Hey, where's breakfast?" Amid the camp's morning clamor, Ankrid lowers his gaze as a nearby soldier roars toward the minstrel. Do you plan to feed us after you've digested your food and crapped it out? In the camp's morning stillness, Ankrid approaches the seated corporal. Corporal, how is your injury? He asks, as the man studies a small metal tool in his hands. Ankrid's expression hardens as he weighs the corporal's words. The camp's quiet morning presses in around them. A woman carves a piece of wood with focused intent. If you're thankful, show your gratitude by returning to duty soon, sir, she says without looking up. Inside the dim tent, the candle on the wooden table flickers, its light casting long shadows across the empty room. A mug stands forgotten beside it. The barracks grows quiet as Ankrid settles on his bed. Good night, Ankrid, says the blond soldier from beneath his blanket, ending an uneventful day. In the quiet barracks, Ankrid drifts into sleep, the day's uneventful hours already fading. What the hell's gotten into you two? A voice grumbles from the darkness, cutting through the quiet of the barracks where several men lie asleep under their blankets. It was a day in which nothing really happened, Ankrid thinks, as he sinks deeper under the blanket, the barracks quiet around him. Ankrid sits up in the dim barracks, pressing a hand to his pounding temple. Is the wandering minstrel here again? He mutters, the bitter taste of a half-digested breakfast still on his tongue. What a headache! He said the same thing yesterday! A bearded soldier roars across the barracks, but Ankrid only gazes out the window, letting the complaint wash past him. A soldier with light brown hair snarls across the barracks, his face twisted in anger. Behind him, another man sits on his cot, watching the morning's familiar complaints unfold. The soldier with light brown hair snarls across the barracks, his anger undimmed by the morning hour. Ankrid watches from the shadowed mid-ground, silent and still. Ankrid bolts upright in his cot, drenched in sweat. His heart thunders against his ribs. No, it can't be. In the barracks, Ankrid looks up at the man perched on a crate, twin knives glinting in his hands. How is your injury? The soldier asks, the thump of metal against wood punctuating the morning air. The ointment helped a lot, Ankrid mutters, a bead of sweat tracing down his throat as the thump of metal against wood echoes nearby. The ointment helped a lot, Ankrid says, a single bead of sweat trailing down his cheek as the thumping from the crate continues. The ointment helped a lot, Ankrid says, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple as he glances toward the steady thumping from the crate. From atop the crate, the rhythmic thump of blade against whetstone continues as Ankrid looks up, his dark eyes shadowed with exhaustion beneath the bruises. A single candle flickers on the wooden table, casting the mug's shadow long across the worn surface in the quiet barracks room. Lying in the dim barracks, Ankrid stares at the ceiling, his mind turning over the impossible. Who killed me, and how? He knows the path to his bed is guarded by layers of defenses. For the enemy to get all the way here, they have to get past many obstacles along the way. And that would only be possible for a night, at the very least. In the dark of the barracks, Ankrid's gaze sharpens as the pieces click together. But that isn't likely. This was a quiet assassination, likely by someone on the inside. Ankrid's green eye locks into focus, the barracks' darkness pressing in around him. The assassin came to mark her prey. Now he will see the truth for himself. A quiet and nimble elf, perfect for the job. The assassin stands cloaked and still, her light hair catching the dim light. Did she come that day to mark the location of her target? Ankrid's suspicion coils tighter in his chest. I'll just have to see for myself, Ankrid resolves, his mind fixed on the infirmary's single entrance. He calculates the risk of raising the alarm. Ankrid's back tenses beneath his tunic, the light fabric straining as he holds his breath. In the darkness of the barracks, he measures every heartbeat, every creak of wood, waiting for the assassin to show herself. A sudden, brutal blow strikes Ankrid from the darkness. The sharp crack of impact shatters the silence of the barracks. The blow sends Ankrid to the ground, his head snapping back as the world spins into a blur of shadow and pain. Ankrid's eye widens in the dim barracks as a cold realization strikes. A poisoned dart! He gasps, a single bead of sweat tracing his temple. In the dark barracks, Ankrid thrashes against his bed, arching in agony. I didn't even see anyone, he cries, then groans, Arg! Ach! Ankrid crashes to the barracks floor, tangled beneath the wooden bed frame. It's completely paralyzed me. I can't even speak, he realizes, his limbs locked and useless. Ankrid lies frozen on the barracks floor, the poison still locking his muscles. It's a powerful poison, he realizes. This must be why I didn't even know I was attacked. Ankrid's mind drifts into darkness as the poison takes hold. A hooded figure lurks at the edge of his fading consciousness, and names whisper through the void. Valen, Ragna, Ragna! Ankrid sits up in his bed, forcing his poison-locked muscles to move. Across the barracks, a hooded figure stands motionless. Cran, he whispers, the name slicing through the dim air. Veer! Ankrid screams, blood spilling from his lips as the poison racks his body in the dark barracks. In the dark barracks, Ankrid's scream slices the air. A hooded assassin raises a sword over a sleeping soldier. The assassin! The assassin's sword plunges into the sleeping soldier's chest. Stab! Blood. The sword buries itself in Ankrid's chest. Stab! The word hangs in the cold air as blood blossoms across his Ankrid's jaw clenches as the cold steel pierces his chest. The orange torchlight catches the shock in his purple-veined eyes. Pain and fury twist his face into a snarl. The blade descends in a swift arc, and a wet splash cuts through the barracks air as steel finds flesh. Sweat beads on Ankrid's brow as the wound burns through his chest. His eyes widen, pupils shrinking to pinpricks, while the torchlight flickers across his strained face. The story continues. The story continues. The story continues. The sun blazes over the green mountains, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. A single voice cuts through the open air. Who's the hero of the battlefield? The hooded musician plucks the lyre's strings, bandaged forearms catching the mountain light. No song escapes the open mouth. Only silence answers the earlier cry. On a wooden bench beside the mountain camp, Ankrid sits barefoot and hunched. This is the third time I've woken up on this same day, he mutters, his hands resting motionless on his knees. Ankrid sits hunched on the low wooden bench inside the tent, his head bowed. This is the third time I've woken up on this same day, he mutters, the words heavy with dread. Under the bright cloudy sky, Ankrid eyes the hooded commander, her pointed ears and pale hair stark against the light. And the commander? He mutters. Even if I defeat that first assassin, I'll have to face her immediately after. Inside the dim tent, Ankrid sits on the edge of the wooden bed, head bowed and hands limp on his thighs. I feel so powerless, he whispers to the empty air. Ankrid slumps forward on the edge of the cot, shoulders tight. It was only a few days ago that I felt this same feeling, he mutters, the memory pressing on him. Ankrid stands on the open field, his armored hand extended as the warm light of a breaking dawn spills through the sky. Dust and glowing motes drift around him, stirred by the approaching army. Amid the drifting motes of dawn, the armored figure's neck and shoulder loom in, close, pale lavender-gray skin marked by the faint edge of a collar. Encred lifts his armored hand against the blazing dawn, fingers curled in a half-open reach. Encred's blade cleaves through the armored giant's neck, the head vanishing in a burst of dark energy. The body hangs suspended for a heartbeat before beginning to fall. "I will find a way," Encred mutters, already twisting to meet the next attacker. From the mouth of the tent, Encred scans the mountain pass, his bruised face unreadable. The distant peaks glint under the cloudy sky, heavy with the memory of blood. Encred leans from the tent opening, his gaze fixed on the mountain pass. The morning light glints off distant peaks, promising another day of blood. Encred grips the tent flap, his knuckles pale against the worn leather. A sliver of his face catches the mountain dawn. "I had no idea you cared so much about my training, Lieutenant Venzens," Encred spits, still seated in his rumpled bedroll. "Get lost! Just seeing your face puts me in a crappy mood." The blonde soldier's voice cuts through the air. Encred's blue eyes narrow, his jaw tightening as he remains silent. The blonde soldier blocks the view, but behind him, Encred stands rigid while a man with light brown hair sits on the floor, mouth agape. "Are you two fighting again?" a voice calls out. "Should I come back later?" The tent flap rustles as a blonde soldier peeks in with a sly smile. Encred stands rigid behind him, while the light brown-haired man sits on the floor, looking up in concern. A sharp swish cuts through the air. Encred steps into the barracks tent, surprised by the stillness inside. The dark-haired commander stands beside a cot where a blonde soldier lies face down, resting under a thin blanket. Encred watches Lieutenant Venzens from across the tent as the commander examines a strip of pale fabric between his fingers. Considering how carefully the assassin checked Cran, the blonde soldier mutters, ducking through the tent flap. He has to be their target. Cran's eye narrows, the blue iris sharp as a blade's edge as he processes the blonde soldier's words beyond the tent flap. In the barracks, a shirtless, bearded man lies on a cot with his hands behind his head, while a red-haired man sits and another dark-haired recruit sprawls across a neighboring bunk. "But I'd die in an assassination because of this guy," Encred reflects, his gaze unreadable. "I suppose it can't hurt to ask just this once." Inside the barracks, Encred turns to face the long-haired man. "Just who are you?" he asks, his voice cutting through the stale air. The long-haired man tenses, a bead of sweat trailing down his temple. He looks over his shoulder, silent, his answer caught somewhere between his tongue and his nerves. "Drats, maybe that wasn't the best way to do this," Encred mutters, his gaze falling inward as he compares his bluntness to Rem's finesse. Encred turns to face Rem, his earlier muttering still hanging in the air. Rem rests a hand on his hip, a small dark object held loosely at his side, and meets Encred's gaze in silence. The story continues. "Why not?" Encred asks the blond man, who merely shrugs in reply. Inside the barracks, a third soldier lies on a wooden bed frame. Encred falls silent, his contemplative gaze lost somewhere beyond the barracks wall. In the barracks, Encred turns to the bearded soldier. "All right then," he says flatly. From across the room, a furious voice demands, "You're going to give up that easily? Why even bother?" "Why even bother?" the light-haired soldier shouts, rising to confront Encred. Encred keeps his back turned, arms crossed, his sheathed sword still at his hip. The light-haired soldier jabs a finger toward Encred. "And you, Crab or Cran or whatever, you have crap manners." His accusation sharpens. "Tell me the truth. You're not one of our countrymen, are you?" From across the barracks, a blond soldier watches the argument unfold, his gaze calm and steady. The barracks fall silent. Encred's accuser flinches, recoiling as if struck by the blond soldier's unwavering stare. Across the silent barracks, a pair of dark boots steps forward, one deliberate pace at a time. Step, step. The blond soldier closes the distance, his eyes fixed on the accused. The bearded soldier looks up, his eyes wide with desperation. "I would never betray our country," he pleads as the dark boots halt before him. The blonde woman studies the bearded soldier like a puzzle, her smirk sharpening. "I can sense from his eyes and every movement of his body," she murmurs, reading his guilt in the air. In the dim barracks, the blonde woman shifts her sharp gaze to the dark-haired soldier, reading his silence like a written confession. Under a starry sky, drifting with green leaves, the blonde woman descends through the night air, her red cape flaring. The dignity of a knight, she declares. Inside a dim room, the bearded man sits on the floor with a cloth over his legs, glaring upward. I'm your superior, he insists, but the blonde man only smirks down at him. Kren is no knight, the dark-haired soldier declares, his sharp blue eyes fixed ahead. It's obvious from how he dies so easily at the hands of an assassin. The story continues. A single candle flickers on a wooden table beside a bucket, its light casting long shadows across the empty barracks. Good night, Encred, the stillness whispers. Encred lies on his back in the dim barracks, mouth slightly open. You too, a voice murmurs from the shadows. Ahem, a throat clears softly. Did Kran scare Venzins earlier? The question echoes in the dark barracks. Encred's purple eyes stare unblinking at the ceiling. He's gotten a lot more quiet, he whispers to the shadows. In the dim barracks, a soldier with spiky dark hair turns his head, the orange torchlight catching one side of his face. His blue eyes scan the shadows, still pondering whether Kran truly scared Venzins earlier. A tent flap snaps in the night breeze. From inside, a grim prediction echoes across the dark camp. Soon, the assassins will come, and all three of us will be dead. The brown-haired soldier sits up sharply, the sheath at his hip whispering against the bed frame. On the next cot, a blanket shifts as a sleepy soldier lifts his head and sends a silent, questioning look his way. The story continues. Inside a dim tent, the man with the goatee narrows his eyes. I suggest you cooperate if you want to live, sir, he warns, his tone cold and final. Inside the dim barracks, Encred spins with a sudden, sharp motion. He's finally gone over the edge, a voice mutters. Encred lies motionless beneath the sheet, his blonde hair splayed across the pillow. The barracks fall quiet around him. Encred rises from the cot, his bare back catching the faint light. The dim barracks holds its breath around him. A blade slices through the soldier's neck, blood erupting against the orange-tinted sky. His wide blue-purple eyes lock onto nothing as the mountains blur behind him. Encred gapes as his shoulder tears open, white feathers spilling from the wound under the star-scattered sky. What? He whispers. Encred grips the sword hilt buried in his shoulder, blood soaking his tunic under the star-scattered sky. When did, he gasps, disbelief cracking his voice. A giant, furry limb smashes into the soldier's face, blood spraying from his mouth as he staggers backward across the muddy battlefield. Did you take a club to your head out on the battlefield? Shut up and get back! A voice roars over the clash. Encred crashes onto the blood-soaked earth, his eyes wide as the sky spins above. Who's the hero of the battlefield? A voice mocks through the chaos. Amid the chaos of the battlefield, a hand reaches toward Encred, who lies bloodied and dazed. The air fills with spray of blood and motion as the world spins around him. Encred recoils as the blade slashes toward his throat. Now! The enemy shouts, and blood sprays across the fiery sky. A dark, furry limb streaks through the air above Encred. How do I fight an enemy I can't see? He gasps, scrambling away from the invisible blade. A brutal impact hammers Encred's chest, sending him to the ground. How do I fight an enemy I can't see? He gasps, blood spraying across the night air. They're invisible to me, Encred mutters, his gaze fixed on the sky as he braces for the next attack. Under the vast, cloud-streaked sky, Encred stares ahead with wide eyes. They seem to know everything about me, he mutters, his voice lost to the wind. On the battlefield, beneath the churning sky, a hooded figure stands still, only the dark fabric of the cloak and a pale boot visible. Encred's voice cuts through the air. As long as I can't avoid the poison dart, I'll just keep dying meaninglessly. Encred's fist tightens around his sword hilt, knuckles white with determination. The 20th day, 20 times have I died, he murmurs, the words a bitter confession to the wind. Encred stands alone on the battlefield, fist clenched, his face twisted in raw frustration. Without being able to do a single thing against the assassins, he spits, the bitter truth burning on his tongue. Encred stares down at the muddy ground, his shoulders trembling with fury. Without being able to do a single thing against the assassins, he spits, the confession scraping out of his throat. Encred's eye widens, the bitter weight of 20 deaths pressing into his stare under the vast, star-scattered sky. Encred strides through the camp, past tents and a wooden fence toward the distant mountains. He grips a small knife and mutters, "I'll start by thinking about ways to avoid the dart." Fighting comes after. "I'll start by thinking about ways to avoid the dart," Encred mutters, stepping past the tents toward the distant mountains. Fighting comes after. Encred stops mid-stride as a seated soldier with a green scarf calls out, "Why is Saxon a treacherous wild cat?" The man's eyes narrow. "That's what you call him, isn't it?" Encred's mind races, sharp black streaks slicing through his thoughts as he considers the dart's flight. The camp fades into a blur of motion and resolve. Encred's jaw tightens, his gloved hand rising as he locks eyes with the accuser. The accusation still hangs in the stale camp air, unanswered. Encred's gaze lifts to the sky, the soldier's warning still echoing in his mind. No one has ever succeeded, but his eyes burn with the resolve to try anyway. The story continues. Encred raises his hand near his face, staring ahead as the question hangs in the air. How could I avoid it?" he mutters, the words heavy with doubt. The conversation falls into silence, the white void swallowing all sound. No ground, no sky, only the weight of unspoken words hanging in the emptiness. In the white void, a man with wavy brown hair and a stern gaze stands in silence, his expression unreadable as the weight of the conversation presses down. Back in the camp, Encred stands while the brown-haired man crouches beside a wooden crate, releasing a long, weary sigh. Encred stands in the camp, his gaze fixed forward, a quiet tension settling over his features as the words hang unspoken between them. Encred casts a glance to his right, a silent question forming in the open air of the camp. The story continues. Encred stares past his shoulder into the empty sky, a wry edge in his voice. "Eyes on the back of my head? What do you mean by that?" Behind him, the dark-haired man with the small blade shifts, a sliver of a silhouette against the clouds. Encred's steady gaze cuts across the camp, unblinking, as the distant figure stirs near the wagons. Beyond the barracks, the covered wagon stands silent beneath the clouds. What? How did he see that thing so far away? Does he really have eyes on the back of his head? Someone mutters, unable to fathom Encred's sight. "What? How did he see that thing so far away?" The muttered question drifts through the camp, unanswered beneath the heavy clouds. "Eyes about to fall apart," Encred murmurs, his dark hair barely visible as he stares into the distance of the camp. A cart overturns with a crash near the edge of camp, sending debris scattering across the packed earth. Saxon lies face up on the ground, unconscious, his dark hair splayed against the dirt. Saxon pushes himself up, his sharp gaze fixed on the overturned cart and the scattered debris around the camp. The woman's voice cuts through the camp's tense air. "A prophet? Your powers of speech have really taken a hit since spending more time with that barbarian, sir," she says, her tone dripping with sarcasm as Saxon stands frozen. Under the open sky, Ragna taps her ear with a gloved hand, a silent answer to Saxon's unspoken question, as if to say, "The truth is in what he hears, not what he sees." The wagon wheel looms at eye level, its joint quivering with each rotation. Under the bright sky, Ragna and Saxon watch the wooden spokes blur, proof that what you hear can be trusted. Ragna looks up into the darkening sky, her voice firm with certainty. "Once you hear something, you can make predictions." The story continues. AEO. In the camp, a muscular man with dark hair speaks over his shoulder. "If you want practice, just keep listening. Sharpen your senses and chase the sounds," he says. His long-haired companion looks down, then replies, "That was more detailed than I expected from you. Usually, you'd just say it's too troublesome to explain." Radna turns to glance over her shoulder, her long brown hair shifting as she catches the strained conversation between the two men. Beside her, Saxon stands still, listening to the words that have just hung in the air. On the training field near the white tents, the red-haired man turns his head and scowls. But it's better than having you pester me non-stop, he says, his mustache twitching with irritation. Enkrit stares down at the training ground, his blue eyes sharp and unblinking, fixed on the exchange unfolding below. The camp sprawls under a vast, star-strewn sky. A red flag snaps atop the main tent, marking the heart of the encampment. Enkrit turns his head toward the crash, the flickering firelight warming his skin as the camp stirs. A figure crumples to the dark earth, debris scattering like pale sparks across the ground near the overturned cart. In the amber glow of dawn, Saxon's eyes stay sealed, his sharp brows drawn into a silent question, as if he listens to the crash that just shattered the camp's stillness. Enkrit stares into the torch's amber glare, his ears catching the steady crunch of boots. Enkrit's face catches the torchlight, one eye sharp with focus as he tracks the patrol's steady rhythm. Enkrit holds his breath, the torch's crackle masking his stillness as the patrol's footsteps draw nearer. "Where are you?" Enkrit whispers, his eyes squeezed shut as if trying to see through the darkness. The torch crackles nearby, but his mind searches for a presence he can't yet find. Enkrit's whispered search finds an answer in the night. A cloaked figure crouches low in the dark earth, leaves drifting around them like silent scouts. A burst of light erupts beside a tent in the camp, scattering green leaves into the star-scattered night sky. The disturbance echoes through the darkness. The cloaked figure crouches low in the camp shadow, one hand pressed to the earth. Leaves spiral around them as they listen to the night's chaos. A thin rod pierces the red-haired man's neck, blood splattering across the warm camp air. "Of course I'd fail," he gasps, the mocking question echoing in his mind. Who's the hero of the battlefield? Enkrit sits on the edge of his bunk, fingers pressed into his skull as the memory of the mocking question burns. Who's the hero of the battlefield? Cypress. Cypress. The name echoes through the quiet room, a bitter answer to his failure. Enkrit stands outside the tent, his fist clenched tight against the blue sky. "No improvement!" The word hangs in the air like the flag above him. Saxon's gaze drops, a faint smirk curling his lips as he listens. "And if you learn to hear soft and distant sounds—" The blue sky stretches overhead, patient and unanswering. Inside the tent's dim light, the companion continues his lesson. "And if you learn to hear soft and distant sounds—" Outside the tent, Enkrit stares across the camp, the blue sky bright above the row of white tents and snapping red flags. The lesson about soft and distant sounds lingers as he searches the horizon. Enkrit stands alert in the camp, the snap still ringing in his ears. He scans the surroundings with a serious gaze, his dark collar high against the wind. The speaker extends a gloved hand, palm open, as Enkrit watches from behind. And in the chaotic clutter of hundreds, thousands of different sounds, in the dim barracks, the instructor clenches his gloved fist. "You pick out one wave," he says. A figure strides away through the dim barracks, his steps echoing against the wooden floor. Behind him, a voice calls out, "So you know what I did to his neck?" Under the bright sky and fluttering red banners, Enkrit clasps his hands and lifts his gaze. The green leaves drift past him as he listens, waiting for the voice that followed him from the barracks. The barracks yard is still, the red banners snapping in the breeze. Saxon stands with his arms crossed, eyes closed, as a single word escapes his lips. "What?" Enkrit listens to the flags snapping in the breeze, their flapping merging into a single sound. "How many flags were there? 7? 10? He wonders, counting the red banners against the bright sky. Enkrit tilts his head back, eyes closed, and murmurs, "I feel the waves, familiar sounds." The red flag with its three-sword emblem snaps overhead as leaves drift past. Enkrit's eyes remain shut as a bird wings past, its shadow flickering over his face. "And unfamiliar ones," he whispers, the flutter of leaves and the distant flap of the flagpole's pennant merging into a strange rhythm. Enkrit drops into a low crouch in the grass, his hands pressed together, eyes fixed on the back of a light-haired man. Around them, the tents of the barracks snap in the breeze, and scattered leaves drift past. The blond man grins, his eyes bright against the blue sky. "Yeah," from Enkrit. "Not bad," he says, a green leaf drifting past his shoulder as the breeze stirs the camp behind him. Enkrit's blue eyes narrow as he looks down toward the ground. A breeze carries a few green leaves past his face. "Does this look like training to you?" he asks, his voice flat. In the camp yard, Encred sits cross-legged on the grass as the blond soldier adjusts the sack over his shoulder. "I don't particularly like it, but if it suits you," he says, a green leaf drifting past his smile. Encred lowers his gaze, the bitter weight of his own thoughts pressing down in the quiet yard. A slow grin spreads across his face, the pale blonde of his hair catching the light as he watches Encred sit in silence. Encred meets the light-haired man's gaze, his blue eyes sharp beneath the shadow cast across his face. The leaves rustle overhead as he considers the remark. A dark arrow drives into the earth between Encred and the light-haired man, its glowing tip embedding deep. The impact hurls clouds of dirt and leaves into the air, the sharp crack echoing through the forest. A plume of dirt and leaves bursts into the air where the arrow strikes the ground between Encred and the light-haired man. The dark arrow slams into Encred's neck, splattering blood. "Ayarj!" he cries, staggering from the brutal impact. The armored soldier drives his blade through the light-haired man's chest, blood erupting across the dusty ground. The hooded soldier wipes the blood from his blade, the steel catching faint light in the cramped passage. The stench of iron hangs thick as he lowers the sword. The light-haired man's scream tears through the dusty passage as twin blades pierce his chest, blood bubbling past his lips. "Stab! Stab! Stab!" The man lies back in the dim cell, the rough stone wall casting shadows across his tired face. "The 33rd day. I've failed again," he mutters, the words heavy with exhaustion and defeat. Encred falls through the night air, his cloak streaming behind him like a dark banner. "I heard nothing," he mutters, the green leaves of the forest swirling around him. Encred's boots hit the grassy earth outside the camp's edge, his cloak settling around him like a dark shroud. The scattered green leaves and debris from his fall drift down around the pale tent. In the dim cell, the light-haired man lies motionless on his back, a sword driven through his chest. "Failure." The quiet word seems to echo from the blood-stained air. The murmur of voices and the crunch of footsteps drift across the camp. A man sits on the grass near a tent, staring ahead as a flag with an eye emblem flaps against the blue sky. The man closes his eye, head tilted toward the sky. Overhead, the flag snaps in the wind, a sharp flap that cuts through the camp's murmur. The story continues. A man with dark gray hair stands amid falling leaves, his hands clasped before him as tents and flags bearing an eye emblem flutter against the blue sky. "It requires doing the most simple but necessary thing," he states. Above the camp, a bird glides against the sparkling blue sky, its talons outstretched. A golden point gleams on the ground below. The gray-haired commander stands motionless as the bird's shadow passes over the camp. His calm gaze follows the creature's descent toward the gleaming point on the ground. The cloaked figure plunges through the night, green leaves swirling around the massive sail-like tent. A single eye glints in the darkness as the stranger's body angles downward, momentum carrying them across the slanted canvas. Encred looks up as green leaves drift past him against the bright blue sky. The memory of the night's strange encounter lingers in his eyes. Under the blue sky, with drifting leaves, a blond-haired man carrying a sack over his shoulder looks down. "Ha! You startled me," he says to the figure sneaking up from the foreground. The blond man's fingers dig into the coarse fabric of the sack, knuckles whitening as he steadies himself after Encred's sudden appearance. The camp sprawls under a blue sky, tents and crates scattered across the grass. The blond man lowers his sack, peering down at Encred. "Ah, you've been sitting with your eyes closed." Saxon's sharp blue eye narrows in the camp air, a green leaf drifting past his dark hair. "To train yourself to hear better, haven't you?" "Because you're not one to waste your time like a fool." In the moonlit camp, a cloaked figure surges forward, arm raised to strike. Saxon's counter sends the cloaked figure sprawling backward, mouth agape and eye wide with shock. Saxon's counter lands true. The cloaked figure's head snaps sideways in the camp's dim firelight, motion blurring the face into a streak of shadow and orange. Saxon looms over the fallen cloaked figure, knife raised in the warm amber light of the barracks room. "You are no longer," he begins, the unfinished threat hanging in the air. Tears or sweat streak the cloaked figure's face as his hands clench at his chest, teeth bared in a silent scream. The orange firelight casts his wide, desperate eyes into hollow pits. A man with spiky brown hair steps from the shadows, a wicked grin splitting his face as the blade's tip catches the firelight. A hand lashes out from the empty white void. Slash! The sound of the strike itself tears through the silence as Around recoils, crying out, G.A. Hash! A dark-haired man looms over Around, who lies sprawled on the ground. You are no longer, the attacker declares, the word hanging unfinished as the slash still echoes. In the firelit room, the hooded attacker grimaces, teeth bared and spittle flying as a pained cry is smothered in his throat. Around flashes a menacing grin from the ground, the attacker's knife tip catching the firelight near his throat. The cloaked figure's jaw tightens, teeth gritted against the firelight. A sharp hiss escapes through clenched lips. Shh. Around grimaces, teeth clenched beneath the dark hood. The firelight catches the taut line of his jaw as the blade holds steady against his throat. Around's jaw clenches tight beneath the hood, the firelight glinting off the blade pressed against his throat. Not a sound escapes him now. Around's focus sharpens through the streaks of movement. I can tell he's nowhere near as skilled as the twisted stabber, he thinks, then declares, I can take him on. Around's blue eye narrows with resolve. I can take him on, he declares, the firelight flickering in his pupil. Around glances sharply to the right, his blue eye scanning for danger. I can take him on, he mutters under his breath. Around hurtles backward through the air, the force of the blast sending light and particles spiraling around him. He bares his teeth. Still, I can't let my guard down. The hooded assassin's kick tears through the air toward Around. He's still a highly trained assassin, Around grits out, bracing for impact. He's still a highly trained assassin, Around mutters through gritted teeth, bending backward as the hooded figure's kick whistles past his face. The motion lines blur the dark air around them, particles scattering like sparks from the sheer speed of the exchange. Around's counterstrike catches the hooded assassin off guard, the blade slicing across his face and wrenching a pained grimace from him as he recoils, sharp teeth bared in shock. Around's blade carves upward, slicing through the hooded assassin's exposed face. The assassin's head whips back, a pained grimace twisting his features. The story continues. The blade tears across Around's face, a diagonal wound blooming red against his skin. The impact snaps his head sideways. The slash sends Around crashing to the ground. He lies stunned, the assassin looming above him with blade still poised for the next strike. The elf commander lifts his gaze to the stars, his eye reflecting their distant light. Around's gaze locks onto the starlit sky, his eye reflecting its distant fire. A heavy thump shakes the barrack walls. Around's hand tightens on the knife as a warning cuts through his thoughts. Don't stab her first. Around lurches forward, his knuckles white on the knife. The thump still echoes in the barracks, and the warning to hold his hand battles with the instinct to strike. Around surges forward, knife slashing through the warm light. If I don't stab her first, he thinks, the barracks blurring around him. The story continues. Around's eye widens as a woman with light hair screams and brandishes two crossed knives. I thought she was with the assassin, he realizes, the barracks spinning with confusion. But was she trying to protect us? In the barracks, the light-haired woman braces herself, gripping her staff as the world blurs with motion around her. She looks upward, startled, as if caught in a violent pull or sudden attack. Around's blade cuts through the dim barracks air as his cape trails behind him, teeth bared in a desperate snarl. Around crashes down from the air, knife poised to strike as his cape billows behind him like a dark banner of desperation. Around's guttural cry tears through the barracks as his knife clashes against steel, a deafening clang ringing out from the fiery impact. Around blocks the hooded figure's strike with his open palm, sparks erupting from the impact as a small blade spins away into the fiery gloom. A loud swoosh cuts through the dim room as the hooded assassin hurtles backward, cloak trailing, his grimace fixed in pain. Around stands poised, watching his foe retreat. Around hurtles backward through the night air, his hand brushing the canvas of a large tent as the fabric billows around him. Inside the canvas tent, Around stares at the wall, a cold sweat beating on his temple as the question echoes in his mind. Who would send an assassin for a lowly foot soldier like him, or Venzen's? Who would send an assassin for a lowly foot soldier? The blonde soldier asks, a bead of sweat rolling down his cheek. Around clenches a thin object in her hand. You are a sharp one, she says, her pointed ears catching the warm tent light. Around's brow furrows, his purple eye narrowing in the dim tent light. The words hang unspoken. Word getting out would be troublesome. Evidence needs to be destroyed. Around draws his sword from the scabbard with a sharp swish inside the dim tent. Considering that evidence needs to be destroyed, he mutters, the orange lamplight glinting off the blade. Around rises, dagger ready, his gaze fixed forward. The blonde figure steps close, and a sharp gasp cuts the tense air. I have a request to make, the blonde-haired figure says, facing around in the dim tent. Around grips his dagger, his gaze locked on the stranger. Around raises his dagger, a silent warning in the dim tent. Step! He orders the blonde figure, his gaze hard and unyielding. In the dim tent, the blonde soldier tilts his head with a knowing smirk. Want anyone to die tonight? He asks, his gaze fixed on Around. Around falls silent in the dim tent, his blue eyes fixed on the blonde soldier's smirk. He offers no answer, only the weight of the question hangs in the air. Around looks down, a faint mark on his face catching the dim light of the tent. As you wish, sir, the hooded figure murmurs, bowing their head in the dim tent, their hand adjusting the red cloak. Inside the dim tent, the elf in the red cloak bows low, the golden embroidery at their waist catching the faint candlelight. As you wish, sir, they murmur. Around's gaze sharpens as the realization settles in the tent's dim light. She must be familiar with medicinal herbs, HES. The blond man touches a finger to his lips, lost in thought. Things will become complicated if it gets out that an assassin came by, he murmurs. Around leans closer, his hand brushing his chin. Do you need to get rid of evidence? He asks, his voice low in the tent's dim interior. In the dim candlelight of the tent, Around touches his chin while the dark-haired man and an elf in a red cloak stand with weapons drawn. There's a very easy method, the blonde soldier declares. Flames roar from the infirmary, its dark spires silhouetted against a sky choked with fire and embers. Fire! In the infirmary! A voice cries out, lost in the crackling blaze. Soldiers flee the burning infirmary as its black spires vanish into the roaring flames. Embers swirl through the smoke-choked air, and the crackling blaze drowns every shout. Over there! 2 survivors! A voice calls out through the smoke. One man squats on the grass, headband dark against the ember-lit sky, while another lies motionless and barefoot beside him. Amid the smoke and embers of the burning infirmary, one of the survivors doubles over with a hacking cough. The burning infirmary flares with a violent orange glow as figures scatter through the smoke. Around doubles over, coughing into his hand. I'm sure they'll take care of the rest, a voice cuts through the crackling flames, while a barefoot body lies motionless in the foreground. Through the smoke and dying embers of the infirmary, 2 figures walk side by side. You would have died if that corporal had not bought us some time, sir, one says. Have you had a change of heart because of him? You would have died if that corporal had not bought us time, the bearded man says as he walks beside, Around through the moonlit forest. Have you had a change of heart because of him? In the moonlit forest, a slender figure with pointed ears and long, light hair watches silently from the shadows as Around and the bearded man pass by. Until now, I've tried to run away, Around admits, a large sack balanced over his shoulder as he scans the dark forest. The sun blazes overhead as a warrior with dark, spiky hair grips his sword, sweat on his brow, standing on a hill above a distant village. Around trudges through the moonlit forest, the sack heavy on his shoulder, shadows swallowing his path. Around pauses in the moonlit forest, the sack shifting on his shoulder. He looks down at his companion, long hair veiling his shadowed eyes. But it looks like you've rubbed off on me, Enki. The forest opens to a star-filled sky as Around and the cloaked man walk toward the distant light. We shall meet again someday, The promise drifts back, each in our own places. On the dark, rippling surface of a moonlit pool, the curved scythe dissolves into fine dust. I shall see you again, whispers the fading echo of a promise. Under the star-scattered sky, around raises his gaze. Any time, he answers the fading prayer. Beneath the endless canopy of stars, around lifts his chin to the night. Any time, he vows, his voice steady as the fading memory of Enki's scythe. Under a brilliant blue sky, the camp stretches across the grassy ground, tent standing and burned, the wooden palisade marking its edge. T.S. I was able to live past that repeating death. Around kneels at the edge of the camp, tying a sack closed. I can hear almost anything now. But I still couldn't hear the elf. I'll need to keep training hard, he mutters. At the fire-scarred camp, Around drapes a cloth over his shoulder, ready for action. Fortunately, I wasn't injured again, and I can return to duty immediately, he declares. Around grips the edge of his cloak, his gaze sharp. Fortunately, I wasn't injured again, and I can return to duty immediately, he states, ready to rejoin the fight. Around stands among the camp tents, his hand gripping his cloak. Does he want to pick a fight with me for saving him too? He mutters. Just what is his problem with me? Because we're comrades in arms, sir. Isn't that enough? The bearded soldier calls out from his crate, watching Around stride past with a sack over his shoulder. The bearded soldier on the crate watches. Around stride past, a sweat bead forming on his temple. The story continues. Around halts in the camp, turning to face the other soldier. After all that trouble I gave you? You knave fool, the man says. Around shifts the heavy sack on his shoulder and frowns. What do you mean? He demands. There's a rumor going around the camp. Around hefts the sack onto his shoulder, glancing back as the bearded soldier mutters. Bad timing. Things aren't good back at the camp. The man's reply snaps sharp. What'd you say, you overgrown? Around shoves the bearded soldier hard, the man's teeth gritting as he stumbles back under the force of the blow. On the open road outside camp, Around drives both hands into the bearded soldier's chest, the man stumbling backward with arms flailing as the impact forces the air from his lungs. The bearded soldier staggers back from Around's shove, then breaks into a wide, crooked grin as he looks toward the sky. The story continues. The barracks brawl turns brutal as a soldier in brown recoils from a crushing punch to the face. Don't get close. You just might lose your life. His attacker snarls over the chaos. The story continues. The story continues. The story continues. Around hefts his broadsword, teeth bared. Not before I slash you in half, he roars, then wheels on the others. Where are the other madmen? Why won't they stop them? In the camp's central yard, Around's furious roar fades as the corporal appears, a cloth slung over his shoulder. Enough, you misfits, he says, his tone cutting through the chaos. Behind him, a smaller soldier stares in surprise. Around sighs, gripping his shirt. But I know that my squad is a curse in itself, he mutters, the weight of the camp's madness settling on his shoulders. Around's angry snarl falters into disbelief. Huh, Corporal? When did you get back? He demands, his grip on the sword loosening. The sun crests the distant peaks, painting the sky in amber and violet. A scatter of lingering stars fades into the dawn. The early morning light spills across the barracks room, finding something still in his cot. 3 days back, and rest comes slowly. The barracks room holds its breath as the red-haired corporal looms over something's cot. I was trying to be quiet on my way out, the bearded soldier says, his scarf brushing against his armor. In the dim light of the barracks, something sits up from his cot, his brown eyes meeting the corporal's. Did I wake you, sir? He asks, his voice quiet. Something sits forward on the edge of the cot, his bare feet brushing the cold floorboards as he stretches his shoulders. The bed frame groans under the shift of weight. The story continues. Something steps outside into the winter light, his hand tightening around the hilt of his practice sword until his knuckles go white. The cold air holds the promise of months ahead, and his grip echoes his silent vow. Something hoists the gnarled log overhead, sweat streaming down his bare chest and back in the winter chill. The weight strains every muscle, but he holds steady, his gaze fixed forward as he drives himself through another brutal rep. The morning sun crests the rocky green-dusted hill overlooking the camp. "Good morning, Brother Corporal," a voice calls out across the training ground. A voice calls out from behind, "You're an early bird," and the dark fabric of a sleeve brushes into something's awareness. Sweat flies as a soldier strains under a boulder, doing push-ups. "You're an early bird. Are you back from your morning exercise?" he calls to something. The dirt floor of the training ground trembles as something's boot crashes down, scattering debris. "I commend your commitment," a voice calls from behind him. Something stands in the training ground, his gaze fixed ahead with an unwavering, focused intensity. Something surveys the training ground, his blue eyes sharp and focused. "A well-trained body is like a shield in itself," he declares. On the training ground, the muscular instructor looms over. "Something." "Sir, you are still?" he begins, his tone sharp and expectant. The instructor grins down at something, his muscles bulging. "Are you sure you aren't just freakishly big?" he asks, his silver hair shifting with the movement. Something stands bare-chested under the blue sky of the training ground. The instructor's voice rings out, "But you'll have to train harder, sir. You are still very small." The instructor's voice booms across the training ground, disembodied. "The muscle training technique I taught you before." The words hang in the air, background slashed with motion lines. A jagged speech bubble tears through the rumpled bedding. "It's your turn to make breakfast!" The instructor's voice hammers into the barracks, yanking the sleeping soldiers from their dreams. Something crawls across the cold floorboards, still half blind with sleep. Something drags himself across the barracks floor as a scarred soldier with dark stripes painted across his chest watches, one eyebrow raised. Something rises to his feet and swings the massive sword in a powerful arc. The blade cuts through the barracks air with a sharp swoosh. The light-haired soldier staggers back, his face twisted in panic as Encred's hand locks onto his shirt. "Senseless violence solves nothing," he gasps, the words lost in the chaos of the barracks. The story continues. In the barracks, the soldier's legs brace against the floor as Encred's grip tightens on his shirt. "Senseless violence solves nothing," he gasps, his plea swallowed by the chaos. From the barracks floor, a gruff voice cuts through the chaos. "Sleeping Beauty here is trying to starve us, Corporal." A calmer reply follows. "If you say so, sir." "If you say so, sir," Ragnar replies, his tone flat as he turns toward the barracks door. The complaint about Sleeping Beauty's hunger strike hangs unanswered in the stale air. The story continues. Something recoils as a stinking gray cloth flies into his face, the barracks erupting in shouts. "Get that out of my face! It stinks!" he roars, muscles tensing under his tattooed arm. Something sniffs the gray cloth and grimaces, the foul stench making his eyes water. "Are you that bored?" he mutters, tossing the rag aside. The story continues. Something's hand grips the hilt of his sheathed sword. He turns his head left, eyes locking onto the path ahead. The pale fabric behind him stirs as he prepares to move. The camp sprawls beneath the brooding sky, rows of pale tents stretching toward the dark mountain range ahead. A break in the clouds casts a single shaft of light across the canvas peaks. Something's muscles scream as he throws all his weight into the blade, the impact jarring through his arms. "Ugh," he grunts, the clash of steel cutting through. The bearded man's fist crashes downward, a blur of motion and fury aimed directly at something. The clash of steel echoes through the camp as something locks blades with the fur-clad giant. "I listen with my sensitive ears and block," he shouts, sparks flying between their locked swords as the village burns behind them. Rain streaks through the camp as something looks skyward, his face slick with water and strain. "I maintain my composure with beast heart," he murmurs, steadying himself against the giant's assault. Something surges forward in a blur of motion, his sword cutting through the rain-soaked air as he closes the distance with the horned giant. Something's blade meets the bearded warrior's swing in a shower of sparks, the clang echoing across the rain-soaked field as the horned giant looms behind them. Something's gloved hand tightens on the sword hilt as the impact shivers up his arm, sparks flying through the rain. The bearded warrior lunges through the rain, his top knot streaming as motion lines trace his violent advance. Something braces for the impact. Something drives his blade downward through the rain, the steel keening as it slices the air. The bearded warrior staggers, his footing lost, the impact shuddering through him. The story continues. Amid the rain and ringing steel, a gloved hand seizes the fallen axe's handle, a desperate grip to reclaim the weapon. A boot presses into something's chest as the bearded warrior holds both axe and sword aloft, victorious. The boot drives deeper into something's chest, and the world spins into a blur of speed lines and agony. Gahh! Something grunts as the bearded warrior's fist slams into his spine, bending him double from the brutal impact. Something's cry of agony tears through the air as the bearded warrior's words cut deeper than any blow. Seeing how fast you've been improving, I was expecting something more. Something straightens and scoffs at his instructor. I'm tired of that lunge. Don't you have anything else for me? Something whirls around, his back to the bearded instructor under the dark, mountainous sky. I'm tired of that lunge. Don't you have anything else for me? The story continues. Something stands beneath the twisted tree, the distant mountains silent witnesses to his reflection. I've changed since then, he murmurs, one hand resting on his sheathed blade. Beneath the roiling, storm-dark sky, something clenches his fist, his blue eyes burning with resolve. Now, even if it takes me 100, 1,000 repeats, he vows, I can move forward. The story continues. The thought hangs unfinished, hiss, as something's gaze sharpens. The world blurs away, only the weight of that single syllable remains. Something gazes downward, a faint grin crossing his weathered face. But why do I never get tired of seeing that look in those eyes, he wonders. Encrid turns his back to the muted forest, his muscular shoulders tensing as he moves away. Rain hammers the muted forest, each droplet striking with a soft plip against the dark earth. FSSSH. The rain hisses across the muddy forest floor as something faces the bearded warrior, sword and axe ready for combat. Rain hisses across the camp, drowning the gray tents and distant mountains in a relentless downpour. The rain keeps coming and stopping randomly. Something mutters, arms crossed, as he watches the drizzle from the tent entrance. Inside the damp tent, the bearded man examines his bare foot with disgust. Mushrooms are going to start growing on my toes at this rate, he mutters, while his companion stands with back turned, listening to the rain. The blond soldier snores softly in his bunk, while the man with the white ponytail sits on the floor, bandaged hands clasped around a small object, muttering indistinctly to himself. Outside the tent, rain pelts the red-haired soldier as he clenches a dark, crumpled coat in his fist. How many times have my deals fallen through because of this rain? He shouts, tilting his head toward the distant flag snapping on its pole. Something tilts his head back, rain streaking his face. I'm starting to believe we're really cursed, he shouts, the wet air swallowing his voice. Inside the barracks, the red-haired soldier leans back on his stool, a wet plop breaking the quiet. Haven't you heard, sir? He says, gesturing with a raised hand. First the weather, and now there are a bunch of soldiers getting injured. There was a fire, too. From his stool, something watches the silent officer at the rain-streaked window. Of course, I know there's no such thing, he mutters, then adds with a heavier sigh. But this accursed weather. It keeps feeding the rumors like a wildfire. Something stands at the barracks window, watching the gray sky. His thoughts linger on the soldier's warning about rumors. In the dim barracks, a red-haired soldier sits up on his bunk. But why do you keep standing by the entrance, sir? He asks. Something turns his head, answering, I'm training myself to listen for people. Exactly, the red-haired soldier says, his tone carrying a note of understanding. Something remains at the window, his gaze fixed on the blurred shapes of tents swaying under the stormy sky. The bearded soldier sits up sharply in his bunk, blanket wrapped tight. What shifty manner of training is that? It gives me the creeps, he grumbles. Behind him, a curly-haired comrade reads on, undisturbed by the complaint. Since when did you care about the corporal? The bearded soldier snarls, his disgusted glare sweeping past something who stands by the wall. The woman with curly hair watches from her seat, a quiet observer. The story continues. Corporal peers to his right, the half-read book forgotten in his grip as a thought pulls his focus away from the page. Across the barracks, the white-haired soldier offers a quiet smile, his eyes shut in easy contentment as morning light softens his features. The white-haired soldier's fingers curl gently against the windowsill, their faint purple hue catching the early light as he rests in quiet contentment. Something rests his head on one hand, his gaze drifting toward the window where the morning sky bleeds blue into pink. Something lifts his gaze from the morning light spilling through the window, a knowing smirk curling beneath his beard. "Saw what I saw, did you?" he asks. The story continues. Rain hammers the canvas tents of the night camp. A command carries through the storm. I want each of the company commanders to squash these rumors. In a candlelit tent, Something studies the map with his 4 companions. "Do we have any good soldiers to fill in the open spots?" he asks. Around the candlelit table, the conversation turns to the 444th squad leader. "What about him?" one soldier asks, while another muses. "The one that leads that squad of troublemakers?" "Isn't he a bit dense?" one officer asks, his brow furrowed over the map table. The candlelight flickers across his gray tunic as the others exchange skeptical glances. "What about the 4/4th squad leader?" one officer asks, raising a hand in the dim glow. His companion on the other side of the tent waits for an answer, the flickering light casting long shadows across the dark space. Silence settles in the dim tent. The candle flame stands still, casting no shadows. An armored figure watches from the shadows of the tent, the weight of something's question settling in the silence. The sun blazes over the sprawling camp, rows of white tents stretching under a brilliant sky. Small birds wheel overhead, indifferent to the tension lingering inside. The story continues. Inside the dim command tent, something looks up and narrows his eyes. To the reconnaissance team, something's voice carries a note of disbelief. To the reconnaissance team, Strategic urgency pulses through the command tent like a living thing, the air charged with unspoken plans. The commander leans over the map, his armor creaking with the movement. Across the table, a figure in green waits for orders. Enkert straightens in the command tent, a blood-stained dagger still in his hand. "We have to strike first," he says, the golden torchlight flickering around him. The soldier's blade flashes in the golden torchlight as a cloaked intruder lunges into the tent. "Who goes there?" he shouts. The masked figure raises his own sword and snarls back, "Kill them!" "Kill them!" the masked intruder roars, his sword raised as torchlight glints off the dark armor. The command cuts through the tent like a blade. A helmeted guard staggers as a blade cuts through his armor, blood spraying across the dark metal. "Then his guardian knight will follow," someone snarls amid the chaos. Enkred's blade arcs through the blur of motion, a flash of steel finding its mark. "The 12 enemy soldiers have been reduced to 8, he says between breaths, the slice still ringing in the air. Enkred and his ally push through the tall grass, their boots churning the earth with each stride. The rustle and swish of the undergrowth marks their advance as they close in on the remaining enemy soldiers. The swish of grass marks the enemy soldiers' advance as they move through the golden field, weapons ready. Enkred's eyes snap to the movement in the grass ahead, a spark of recognition or alarm crossing his face. A roar and a clang mark. Enkred's kick, his gloved hand following with a whack through the grass. A hand parts the tall blades, swishing through the grass as the squad pushes deeper into the field. A creature bursts through the tall grass, its claws extended as it lunges forward with a swishing rush. The blade sinks deep into the soldier's shoulder, blood bursting outward as he stumbles back into the tall grass. Something stands at his feet, watching. In the golden field of tall grass, something watches the bleeding soldier. "I will not let it die. It is thanks to this beast," he vows, his gaze unyielding. The golden field erupts with sudden violence. An archer gasps as she pulls her bowstring, while 2 soldiers tumble backward, swords still in hand. "All clear, sir," calls a voice from the chaos, as the thrashing grass settles over fallen foes. Amid the flattened grass and fallen bodies, Enkred scans the field, his blue eyes sharp despite the grime. The all clear hangs in the air, but his grip on his sword remains steady. Through the tall grass, the great feline watches the field with calm blue eyes, its form half hidden among the reeds as the soldiers catch their breath. The 6 survivors push through the tall grass, golden stalks swishing against their armor as the sunset bleeds across the field. One soldier carries a bow, another grips a sword. None look back at the man they left behind. The soldier halts among the golden stalks, his grip tight on the spear. "This is the most I was able to save," he mutters, eyes fixed ahead as the sunset bleeds behind him. Enkred watches the 3 soldiers push through the golden stalks. "This way," the lead calls, pointing ahead. "We must go around." The grass hisses as they move. Blood and white shards burst from a soldier's armored forearm as they press through the golden field. "The spear squad I faced before is especially persistent," a voice warns. A blond soldier staggers, then a dark blade punches through his lower back. "Arge!" he screams, blood spraying across the golden stalks as he crumples. The armored warrior drops to one knee among the blood-soaked stalks, his chest heaving. He pants, breath ragged, one hand braced on the sword's hilt. The golden field around him is silent, but for his labor gasps. The setting sun blazes through the golden field, sending long shadows across the trampled grass. "We must escape while the sun is still up," a desperate voice cries out. The taller warrior strides through the golden grass, blood crusted on his armor. "Press on," he commands. His shorter companion quickens his pace, weapon drawn. "Do you know what you are doing?" he hisses. "That way is closer to the enemy." In the golden reeds, the armored leader fixes his gaze on the distance, his expression hardening at his companion's hissed warning. A sudden clang of metal shatters the golden field silence. The shorter man flinches, jaw dropping, while the armored leader narrows his eyes, searching the reeds for the threat. The 2 men freeze mid-step, their eyes darting through the reeds. The sharp clang of metal still echoes across the golden field, a warning that danger lurks just out of sight. The ponytailed man's accusation hangs in the warm air, his voice still sharp among the reeds. The armored leader turns his back, and the shorter companion watches with unease. In the field of golden reeds, both men stare toward the source of the clang. The younger companion's face hardens, a single bead of sweat betraying his wariness. The young companion's hand drifts toward the cylindrical pouches strapped across his chest, his fingers brushing the T-shaped fasteners. The silence between them grows heavier than the armor against his ribs. The story continues. The stern man with light hair stands amidst the dry reeds, his gaze fixed ahead. The declaration about Corporal Encred still hangs in the air. Among the golden reeds, a man with a goatee and scarred face speaks, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Encred crouches low in the reeds, his gaze fixed and steady. The sun bleeds across the horizon, painting the reeds in hues of fire and copper. The scarred man whispers his first command. The first is to attack the enemy before they discover us so that they never surround us. The sun's rays pierce through the reeds, setting each stalk ablaze with amber fire as the scarred man's whisper hangs in the air. The dry reeds swish aside as a boot steps forward, the scarred man leading his squad into the amber field. Arrows whistle through the air and thud into the golden reeds, scattering across the field as the sun casts its amber glow over the ambush. Arrows slice the amber reeds, and 2 soldiers recoil. One grimaces with bloodshot rage, the other stares in shock. It is only at this location. The sun bleeds orange and pink over the dry reeds as Encred's failed attempts echo in the dying light. 4 swish strokes tear through the dry reeds as Encred's body is yanked sideways into the amberlit field. 4 hooded figures rise from the tall reeds, their spear tips catching the dying sunlight as the ambush tightens around Encred. The 4 hooded figures crouch low in the dry reeds, spear tips glinting in the amber sunset as they tighten their ambush around Encred. Somewhere in the tall reeds, the scarred man's face hardens into a mask of cold concentration as the ambush closes in. The scarred man's cold concentration shatters into fear as he and his companion scramble through the reeds, the ambush turning into a frantic retreat. Amid the frantic splashing and shouts, a dark-haired man waits in the shadows, blue eyes fixed and unblinking. The retreat has begun exactly as he intended. The field of dry reeds sways gently in the muted light, the only sound the whisper of stalks after the retreat. The 3 men emerge from the dry reeds, the blonde with a scar over his eye tightening his metal arm guard. The blonde man with the scar over his eye tightens his arm guard. It is clear why we have failed to escape the field so far, he states. The dark-haired man with the goatee stands among the dry reeds, his serious gaze fixed on the field ahead. He adjusts the metal guard on his shoulder, a strap crossing his chest. The dry reeds part to reveal a sprawling camp of dark wagons and tents. A voice rings out, incredulous. A sudden whoosh sweeps through the reeds, unveiling the sprawling enemy camp beneath a bruised dusk sky. The enemy camp sprawls beneath the bruised sky, its tattered flags and wooden towers casting long shadows across the trampled grass. A lone cauldron glows with a simmering fire, but no voices rise from the silent tents. Tattered banners hang limp above heaps of bleached bones and blood-stained skulls, the only witnesses to the camp's eerie silence. Encred slumps against a blood-splattered tent post, his dark armor streaked with grime. Behind him, Valen's eyes widen as he grips his shoulder, the question of urgency still hanging unanswered in the enemy camp. 5 enemy soldiers stand over Encred's collapsed body, their swords drawn and ready in the torchlit camp. 3 soldiers stand in the enemy camp, the bruised sky casting long shadows. "You are going to set the enemy camp on fire?" a voice asks, the question hanging unanswered in the still air. "One wrong move, and we are sure to be annihilated," the voice from the shadows continues, then demands, "What is your name?" Encred clenches his jaw, weighing each syllable before answering. The man with the goatee waits in silence, his gaze fixed on Encred as if weighing the truth of every word. The story continues. The story continues. The story continues. The vast darkness stretches like an endless void, swallowing every trace of light. Somewhere in the black, a voice calls out, low and uncertain, before silence reclaims the space. The soldier grits his teeth, brow tight with fury as he braces for the chaos spilling from the darkness ahead. 3 soldiers race through the torchlit corridor, boots pounding against the stone floor. The dark-haired soldier in front leads the charge toward the clash of steel ahead. The dark-haired soldier sprints through the enemy encampment, boots slamming against uneven debris as torchlit shadows streak past. A voice roars after him. He is running recklessly through the enemy camp. Ankrid clenches his jaw, sweat beating at his temple as he sprints through the torchlit camp, the shouts of his pursuers still ringing in his ears. Ankrid surges through the torchlit camp, weaving between tents and wooden barracks. A voice from behind calls out, "We haven't run into a single enemy." It's almost as if he knows this camp backwards and forwards. Ankrid bolts past the wooden gallows, its grisly trophies swaying overhead. Two soldiers spin in the dirt, hands bristling, their bodies braced for combat. Ankrid's face contorts, a bead of sweat or tear trailing from his jaw. The gallows shadow falls over him, and the impossibility of what he sees twists in his throat. Ankrid leans against a tent, one hand rising to his chin as sweat traces paths through the grime on his face. The camp stirs around him, but his mind remains locked on the gallows and the impossible truth clawing at his thoughts. Something staggers as the enemy's spears bite into his flesh, blood blooming across his armor. "All troops came after me," he rasps, surrounded by sword and steel in the torchlit camp. The battlefield is littered with the bones of the fallen. A lone soldier stands amid the carnage, spear in hand. "The Asfen troops were hiding that flag," he says. "Their highest priority is to guard it." The soldier stands among the scattered bones, his spear resting against his shoulder. Dark reddish-brown hair catches the faint light as he surveys the silent field. 1. The Wemmersaven, the rector's ass. A lone soldier is visible from the waist down, wearing dark boots, dark pants, and a belted. The bearded man gazes downward, shadows cutting across his face. Did he already know that such a flag existed? He murmurs, the question hanging in the air like the fading twilight. The story continues. The armored figure outlines the plan to his assembled squad, his voice low but firm. "One team will distract the enemies," he says, gesturing with his bent arm toward the darkened camp beyond. The bearded soldier bursts forward, chainmail rattling as his gauntleted hand reaches for his foe. His mouth opens in a battle cry, but no sound escapes the chaotic clash of steel and fire. The soldier's rush carries him deeper into the camp, boots pounding the dark earth as speed lines streak past. He closes on the torchlit structures ahead. Amid the ember-lit chaos of the camp, Ankrid clenches his fist, armor groaning, blood and ash clinging to the battered metal. A sweeping arc of dark motion tears through the ember-lit air, sparks and debris scattering like startled fireflies in the purple gloom. In the enemy camp, Ankrid launches a mid-air kick as a bearded soldier swings a massive, glowing mace through the ember-lit air. Sparks erupt from the collision. The bearded soldier staggers back from Ankrid's kick, his purple eye wide and a bead of sweat tracing his temple. Ankrid sails backward through the twilight air, his sword still in hand as the bearded soldier's counterattack hurls him toward the distant wooden structure. Embers spiral around him against the purplish glow. Ankrid crashes backward through the twilight air, his red glowing eyes fixed on the bearded soldier above. "I have never met this enemy soldier before," he hisses through gritted teeth, the sword hilt clenched in his hand as the wooden structure rushes closer. Ankrid's jaw clenches as the wooden wall fills his vision, the sword still raised and ready. The enemy soldier's face twists in pain as he slams into the wooden wall, dirt and grit clinging to his stubbled cheek. "Rat," he spits through clenched teeth. Ankrid's knuckles whiten as he twists the soldier's collar, pinning him against the wall. The man's jaw stays locked, hatred simmering in the twilight glow. Ankrid spins, mouth gaping, as an armored figure crouches in the twilight behind him, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. "There are more intruders," a soldier shouts from the foreground. Behind him, a crouched comrade in armor scans the twilight sky, alert for the next threat. Ankrid shouts a warning over his shoulder. "There are more intruders." His crouched comrade scans the tree line to the left, muscles tense for the next assault. The comrade's armored fist crashes into the oncoming foe, a sharp crack splitting the dusk air. Encred braces himself, sword held across his body, as the impact sends him reeling through a storm of sparks and motion. The story continues. Encred's left hand rises, fingers grazing the side of his own head as the world spins around him. The crimson haze and streaking light blur into a dizzying storm. Encred's gaze hardens as the crimson haze swirls around him, his hand still pressed to his temple. A blade slices past Encred's chest, the air humming with its passage. He recoils, eyes wide, as the crimson haze shreds into streaks of violet light around him. The blade hisses past Encred's chest, missing by a hair. His eyes track the weapon, the battlefield swirling in purples and reds around him. Encred throws his head back, the glowing blade slicing past his chest in a flash of orange sparks. The crimson haze swirls violet around him. Encred's eye narrows, a bead of sweat tracing his temple as the purple haze begins to thin around him. Encred's gaze sharpens, a single bead of sweat clinging to his brow as the violet haze around him thins. A soldier in a long coat staggers backward, his boots scraping against the stone floor of the barracks. The purple haze continues to thin around Encred as the fight presses on. Encred's jaw tightens, a cold focus settling over his features as the violet haze retreats. The dark purple fabric of Encred's tunic pulls taut across his chest as he braces for the next strike. Around him, the violet haze thins like dying smoke. Encred's focus narrows to a razor's edge, the violet haze around him thinning to nothing. He knows now, raw force alone will not carry him through. The freckled soldier's gloved hand presses flat against the dry earth, his dirt-smudged face slack with shock. He blinks once, slowly, as if the fight has already left him. Encred's mind churns with bitter realization. But was the real wall, he mutters, the question hanging unresolved. Encred plants his feet against the stone floor, violet light spilling from his eyes and along the blade. He turns the sword in a slow arc, ready for whatever comes next through the dark barracks. Encred staggers in the dusty aftermath, the violet glow fading from his eyes. Then I will have to take control of the reconnaissance team again, get through the field, and repeat this day over and over again, he mutters, bracing himself against the blade. Encred's jaw tightens with grim resolve. A sharp swish cuts the dusty air as he moves, already bracing for the deaths to come. Encred bows his head, the sharp points of his dark hair catching the dim light filtering through the barracks dust. The dust settles around Encred as he sinks to one knee, head bowed. Aye, he mutters, the word trailing into the dry air of the barracks. On the war-torn field of battle, a soldier crouches low, sword raised behind his shoulder. "We'll surmount this wall!" he shouts, his face set with grim determination. The soldier's gaze locks onto the towering wall ahead. "We'll surmount this wall!" he roars, his sword raised as if to strike the heavens themselves. 1. CA characters. An adult male, likely Mitch Hurrier, is shown from the chest up, wearing armor and a gauntlet on. The scrape of blade against blade sends sparks across the chaotic battlefield as Mitch Hurrier drives his sword into a parry. The air hums with violence. Mitch Hurrier charges across the blood-soaked field, his boots pounding the mud as he closes the distance. The air still crackles with the shock of his last parry. The ground shudders as a heavy impact rips through the muddy field, the thud rolling like a thunderclap over the chaos of battle. A shock wave of purple and black erupts across the battlefield as Encred's parry meets the incoming strike, the force splitting the air with a violent, jagged tear. The clash of metal splits the air as a dark-skinned warrior drives his blade upward in a brutal parry, the force of the counter sending streaks of orange light rippling through the battlefield's haze. The battlefield trembles as a dark-skinned warrior slams his footing, the ground cracking under the force of his parry's follow-through. A soldier hurtles through the smoke and embers, a blur of desperate motion as the fire races toward the flagpole. 1. A character's, a light-skinned hand, possibly belonging to one of the armored warriors, is visible in the bottom right, gripping. Mitch Hurrier stumbles backward, his boots skidding on oil-slicked earth as a deflected sword sparks above him. Shouts of, "The fire is spreading!" and Someone doused everything in oil. Tear through the chaos. Amid the chaos of spreading flames, a soldier with purplish blue skin and dark spiky hair tumbles to the ground, staring upward. A dagger plunges toward Mitch Hurrier's chest, its blade catching the firelight as he stares up with burning white eyes. The oil-slicked ground trembles beneath him, the chaos of the spreading flames roaring in the distance. The story continues. This man, Mitch Hurrier, staggers backward, his eyes fixed on the hooded figure as flames paint the sky red. 1. Ace Ch. Characters. An armored man with Mitch Hurrier clenches his fist, his eyes wide with alarm as something staggers before him on the blood-soaked battlefield. The story continues. The armored warrior stands motionless on the battlefield, his back to the retreating foe, the vow of a future clash lingering in the smoky air. The enemy's vow still echoes across the battlefield. The warrior does not turn to watch them flee, his sword remains ready, the embers of battle drifting around his armored shoulders. Amid the smoky battlefield, Mitch Hurrier watches the enemy retreat, his brow furrowed in disbelief. He's backing down, he mutters, the question lost in the fading clash of arms. No, even if he is not the wall that I am to overcome today. Mitch Hurrier's words grind through clenched teeth. His gauntleted fist tightens, embers swirling around him as the retreating enemy fades into the smoky haze. Mitch Hurrier's gauntleted fist clenches tighter on the smoky battlefield, embers swirling around him. I still must, he growls, the words lost in the fading clash of arms. On the smoky battlefield, Mitch Hurrier's gaze sharpens. Grow! Stronger! He silently vows, his violent smoke and embers choke the battlefield as Mitch Hurrier locks his gaze forward. Corporal! A soldier shouts, sprinting past in his wake. The battlefield burns as the soldier with light hair sprints through smoke and embers. Corporal! He roars, his voice swallowed by the clash of steel and crackling flame. The light-haired soldier's sprint falters as he halts before Mitch Hurrier, his furious shout swallowed by the battlefield's roar. Dirt streaks his face, but his open mouth hangs silent, the words lost in the embers. Mitch Hurrier strides through the smoke, his cape whipping behind him as embers swirl past. His sword hangs ready at his side, the blade catching the firelight. Mitch Hurrier's narrowed eye cuts through the smoke and ember-lit haze, his jaw set with grim resolve amid the battlefield's roar. Everyone, retreat! Mitch Hurrier bellows, his teeth bared as he glares down through the ember-lit haze. The story continues. Retreat! Mitch Hurrier shouts, swinging his sword in a desperate parry. The clink of steel rings out as a flash of purple light flares in his eye. A cough rattles from the light-haired man behind Mitch Hurrier, his hands clutching his chest as they stagger through the darkening woods. A furious snarl twists Mitch Hurrier's face as he presses through the darkened forest, his gloved hand locked around the sword's hilt. Mitch Hurrier sprints through the darkening woods, his armor clanking as he glances back over his shoulder. Do not delay! Keep running! He shouts to the injured man stumbling behind him. The story continues. Through the chaos of retreat, Mitch Hurrier smirks with grim confidence. I know a safe route, he declares. It is a path for hunters. Mitch Hurrier lifts his gaze, determination hardening his features. We'll put our trust in you, a voice answers from behind him. The squad retreats deeper into the silent forest. Overhead, stars and clouds peer through the tangled branches as the distant clash of battle fades into the night. The squad's boots tear through the tall grass as they flee deeper into the silent forest, the night sky watching overhead. The 3 armored soldiers sprint across the moonlit field, tall grass whipping against their boots as they put distance between themselves and the chaos behind them. We were able to get away, thanks to Andrew and Mac's valor, one gasps, his voice tight with exhaustion. Amid the moonlit field, one of the soldiers glances back with wide eyes and a gasping mouth, his curly hair whipping in the wind. The other man behind him presses forward, boots pounding through the tall grass. The light-haired soldier stumbles to a halt atop the rocky slope, gasping for air as the first rays of sunlight crest the mountains. We made it this far, thanks to everyone giving a helping hand, he rasps. Mitch Hurrier lunges forward through the misty forest, his fingers splayed as he pushes deeper into the dim undergrowth. Behind him, another soldier's boots churn the damp earth, both of them vanishing among the trees. Over the rocky ridge, 5 armored soldiers haul themselves up the steep incline, their forms silhouetted against the breaking dawn. The sun is rising, one mutters, but no one has the breath to answer. The rocky ridge groans under the weight of exhausted soldiers. One with curly reddish-brown hair slumps, his eyes shut and mouth slack. Permission to pass out now, he breathes, barely audible over the morning wind. The soldier collapses onto the grass, steam rising from his heaving chest as the morning sun beats down. Above the ridge, the sky gives way to the void. A red planet looms, swallowing a pale moon in its shadow. Mitch Hurrier stands before his commander, his jaw set with defiance. I would have defeated him if it weren't for the fire, sir. Around them, the distant clatter of falling lances echoes against the rooftops. The shadow of a falling lance flickers across Mitch Hurrier's face as he speaks, his jaw set with stubborn resolve.